This show is sponsored by the Comics Shop.
Welcome to Tuesday Chinwag with your host, Leigh Chalker, writer, artist, and creator of the comic series Battle for Bustle.
G'day, and welcome to another episode of Tuesday Chinwag. My name is Leigh Chalker. I'm the creator of Battle for Bustle, which is out now in the comic shop. Now, there's hundreds of Australian comic books out in the comic shop, which sponsors these live streams. So jump on, buy some stuff, check out some artists and some creatives. Now, the best thing you can do is to jump on Comex on YouTube, Facebook, like and subscribe them anywhere you can find them, because it helps the community all grow and get fresh, and it helps reach other people with the beauty of Australian comics and creators. So I'm not going to beat around the bush for too much tonight. I'm just getting straight into our fluid little show, because the guest this evening is one Mr. Nat Karmichael. How are you, sir?
Hello, Leigh, and hello to everybody who might be out there listening, watching, or whatever you're doing tonight.
Yeah, hopefully they're all, sitting around the fire, mate, chilling out, maybe cooking some marshmallows and stuff. You know how it is, and just enjoy a lovely conversation, mate. So for anyone that hasn't seen the show before, the show is based on who, what, where, when, why, and how. It's a fluid show. We talk about anything and everything that comes up topically, from comics to life to just whatever takes our fancy and whichever way our trains of thoughts go. It is fluid. That's how we like it. And comments are welcome. So please feel free, if you have any questions for Nat or myself, then fire away. Here we go. The fourth monkey. Woohoo. Two Aussie comic legends having a chat. Thank you, Stu. You're a champion. Kerry Harris. Hello to Nat and hi, Leigh. Hello, Kerry. Thank you for watching. Nick May. Have a good one. Thank you, mate. It's, Jeffrey Beats. G'day all. Hello, Jeffrey. I hope you're well. Thank you for watching. And Danny Nolan, welcome to the Top End Trop Fest. Great to see a publisher, historian, super fan like Nat getting a chance to showcase his awesome career. Good on you, Danny, and thanks for watching, mate. You're a champion. All right, Nat. So, mate, we'll just go straight into the existential question, mate, and get this chat off and running, hey? So, who?
Nat Karmichael, and to start off, I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people, elders past, present, and future, because I think that's an important thing to do. Blackfellas in this country were the first storytellers. They were the first fellas who gave the world some wonderful stories, and we're continuing that wonderful tradition. So let's acknowledge them. The land that we speak, Leigh, you and I, is just Blackfella land from the beginning. And let's just acknowledge that. I like to do that because that's important to me. So that's how I want to start. How Nat Karmichael. I'm a publisher. I'm a passionate. I guess I'm passionate about Australian comics more than anything else. And we'll talk about that tonight. I guess we'll talk about a whole range of things because I like this open format, Leigh. So take it away. You can start with a few questions, and I'll try and answer them as best I can.
All right. Well, mate, I want to thank you for that lovely introduction, mate, because, Aboriginal culture, the First Nations people were the first storytellers amongst us, and that's a beautiful culture. And in North Queensland, I live on the Walkarookabar tribe's land, and I am very fortunate to have many friends and basically acquaintances, mate, from the First Nations people, and I admire their culture and what they've done and what they continue to do greatly. So thank you for acknowledging them. That's really very nice of you, mate. Now, on getting into the crux of it, Nat. Now, mate, you're a gentleman, a man that has, I would, from what I have seen of you, man, over the socials and what you publish in that, you're a very proud Australian comic book historian, I would say, with your publishing. You delve back into the past from some, I would say, lost Australian creators that deserve to come out into the light for a new, generation of people to read their beautiful stories. Nat, let's take you back to little Nat and, where you started, where you grew up, mate, like your comic books, how you got into it, where did the love flourish? Yes, Jeffrey, respect to the First Nations people. Well said.
Look, to answer your question, Lee, I suppose I don't think I just focus on past works. I'm also very passionate about modern works as well. So you'll find that some of my publishing covers that area as well. But little Nat was unable to read when he was young, and I'm talking about little Nat being about 3 years old. And he had a wonderful father that used to come home and bring all of these comics to read. Well, I couldn't read, like I say, but comics are a visual medium first and foremost. And little Nat, who couldn't read, was able to look at pictures and see sequential stories and make up the stories himself by just looking at the pictures. And I had a wonderful mum and dad who used to like reading these stories to me as a little fella before I could even read myself. And so my background has always been comics, I guess, and we didn't have TV, and I suppose that was the entertainment medium for myself. I'm the eldest of 6, and so I suppose I was lucky enough to reap the rewards of all the comics, because as I grew a little bit older, the comics were passed down to siblings, or they got new comics, and I was able to read all of them. I could read my sisters, I could read my brothers, and I had my own comics as well. So it was a wonderful experience growing up reading all these comics. Now, they consisted mostly in those days of the English comics, and I'm talking about the Beano, I'm talking about Dandy, but even before that, there was magazines called like Harold Hare's Weekly, and I still remember Harold Hare with his golly gumdrops, or some banal saying like that, that I used to think as a child it was just wonderful. And Jack and Jill, Play Hour. There were a lot of kids' comics back in the day, which I suppose introduced kids to the wonderful world of comics, and that's where I got my introduction. So it was really nice to be able to look at the pictures, and some of those early English comics that I'm talking about, the very early 1960s. There were a lot of the English comics carried a lot of Spanish illustrators, and they carried a lot of Italian illustrators, and the Pommies as well. And it was just a wonderful array of humor, adventure, just things that got you into a different world. I suppose television gives people a chance to enter a different world, and I think comics did the same thing for me.
Yeah, that's lovely, man. Rob O'Connor, 2 fine gentlemen right there, and good evening to Rob, and thanks for everyone out there. Nat, man, that's an awesome thing. Like, did you have those moments where, because like, take you back to like just before you could read in the pictures, and you were making stories up in your mind, and like, the theaters, and like flowing and things like that. Did you find that comic books like helped you to get a bit of a flow into reading when you were younger? Like, would you get the opportunity to sit down with Dad and he'd read your stuff, and the family would all get to around? Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Well, yeah, very much so. It was a very much one-on-one time with my dad. He'd and my mother too. They'd get the comic out, and maybe I'd tell them what I thought the story was about, and then they would read the little caption underneath and expand on it. And I suppose it was a desire to learn to read, to be able to do the stories for myself. But a good comic tells a story, and you can tell a story by looking at the pictures. And if it's a really great illustrator, a really good storyteller, you'll be able to work out a story from the sequence. And I think that was instilled on me when I was very young to appreciate the artwork of a comic. And it was much later, I suppose, than when I learnt to read and got a little bit older, I suppose. I was able to understand that the writer is probably just as important as the artist, because the writer's telling a different story as well. And they've got their own nuances the same way as an artist has. And when you have the amalgamation of an artist and a writer telling a wonderful story, it just makes it just a perfect synthesis. I mean, you can have writers that in Australia, for example, too. I guess a lot of comic book artists and writers are the one and the same person, whereas overseas, I guess it's more prevalent that it's the other way around. You know, you have more writers doing their craft and the artists doing their craft, and just melding those talents together. But in Australia, it was the other way around. But for me, for being in my formative years, it was those English comics. And it wasn't really until I was in my teenage years that I started to discover the American comics. And I think my very first American comic was a Marvel comic, because in Australia at the time, growing up in the 60s, all you could get were the black and white DC reprints. And I wasn't really keen on them. I didn't really like the artwork. I think having grown up reading the English comics, I liked there was a lot of character to some of their artistry, and I didn't find the same with the DC reprints. They didn't really interest me until I was an early teenager. So I got a good foundation, I think, in those English comics. I after graduating from the kiddie comics and being able to read, I went to Ranger and Valiant. Valiant was my favorite. I used to like Valiant. I used to make sure we had an order every week, and there was Kelly's Eye, and there was the House of Dolman, and the Steel Claw. They were some of my favorites, and I found out more recently that Alan Moore was a fan of some of those strips as well. So it's really nice to know that some of those strips have been, replayed today. They've been re-energized, and people are starting to write and draw some of those characters once again, and I find that a great thrill. And some of the reprints lately, they've been reprinting some of those, so that's it's a wonderful nostalgic experience sometimes as an old man like I am, seeing these comics being reprinted, and I can savor them over and over again.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Like when you just mentioned Ranger just then, because my dad collected comic books before me, so I have a bit of a similar, I guess, backstory to you, that it was very much one-on-one time for me with my dad when he was around as well, and he collected Ranger. I've got those comics still tucked away here, and he loved those adventure and the real boys stories, and and he was and then he collected the Amazing Spider-Man and the Uncanny, or the X-Men as they were then, and Marvel Tales and all that sort of stuff. And when I was probably about I guess 7-ish, he used to kick back with me, and man, he used to because I wasn't a big reader either. I was always drawing, but at that stage, I guess, I don't know whether I'd say slow. I just didn't take to it. I didn't pick it up as quick as others, like the reading side of things. But he would sit there, man, with comic books, and he would read them to me with different voices, and boom, bang, so it was wow, it was fully immersive, and awesome memories, man. So I'm really vibing and with what you're talking about there, and feeling, man, because it's something awesome about that. I mean, obviously the love continues for you, Nat. I mean, I don't mean to pry, but I'm looking behind you as you speak, and I'm seeing quite a a plethora, mate, of comic book, stuff in the background, particularly Akira over there, so obviously your tastes all across the board, mate. You know what I mean? You're not just in one particular genre. like which is healthy.
No, that's right. No, that's right. I mean, I think it's good to explore different areas of the comics because it's a universal medium. And these days, I'll have a look at some of the Japanese comics. I'll look at the European comics and the American comics. I've got nothing against them. And going further, what you say, I guess I was lucky that I had sisters, and my sisters had comics that my father, I think, brought them for them to read. There was Bunty, and there was Princess Tina. I can't recall all the names now. Misty, and all of those comics were sort of, I guess they were marketed for girls, but because I was such a passionate reader, well, I read them too. Why not? The Phantom, of course, the Australian Phantom. I mean, that's something we did have in our household. When I was growing up too, there wasn't much in the way of Australian comics because I suspect by then, that the import restrictions had been lifted, and so a lot of the American colour comics were coming on the newsstands. Excuse me. So a lot of Australian original comics, when I was growing up, it was starting to fade away. The only one I can recall with any clarity was the Panther and the Raven by Paul Wheelham. And I did read a couple of episodes there, and I really liked the dynamic style that he had as an artist. The story, that was quite interesting too, as a youngster. But for me, it was just the Valiant comics. I also graduated to things like Smash and Pow, and they reprinted a lot of the Marvel comics. And I can recall really liking Leo Baxendale and Ken Reed as artists. They had some fabulous artwork in the English comics. And but as far as the American comics in those comics went, like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, I still wasn't a fan up until about 13 or 12. But my mother loved it. She loved Spider-Man. I can remember, trying to find my mother one morning, wondering where she was. And she was sitting on the toilet reading Spider-Man. And it was a reprint of one of the Steve Ditko early Spider-Mans. And, she was quite fascinated. She loved it. But me, myself, well, I wasn't a fan until much later. But there you go.
Oh man, that's I guess, like, for lack of a better description, I mean, it's a lovely memory of your mother, you know what I mean, like to have, like reading Spider-Man in the loo. But I mean, man, when I went to Canberra and Gundagai for the first time to meet my dad, like my dad's side of the family, I remember being a little boy, about 5 or 6, I guess, in that sort of zone. And I remember every relative's house that I went to had comics. They just, they just had on a coffee table next to, there's comics. Oh, what do you? And they'd be sitting around waiting, killing time. There was no phones or anything like that. They'd just be sitting there reading a Ghost Rider comic, mate, or or a Phantom and stuff. And I was like, this is amazing. You know what I mean? Like the collectors out there will hate the next part of the story because it was on coffee tables. So there were coffee cups and stuff on these comics, and Dad was, like, don't do that, and you couldn't doggy books with Dad, and he'd be like forever getting up the cousins. You can't put coffee mugs on those comics, man, and they'd be but yeah, man, comics everywhere when I was a kid too, mate, under beds and
that's right.
It was Archies, you name it.
I think the other thing too, Lee, I think the other thing too, I suppose, is that you're right. Comics were everywhere. They were in the newsagent, and that's where you'd find them. But there are also secondhand bookstores, and they used to carry a lot of comics, especially the Donald Ducks and the Mickey Mouses and the Super Goofs and things like that. And my dad also was he used to work in the city, and so he used to catch the train to town. And on his way home, there was also the Red Cross bookstore where they used to sell books quite cheaply, but they also had a large selection of comics. And one of the comics my dad purchased for me was Spider-Man 25. And, you know, I suppose that was my first taste of an American comic that my father passed on to me. But the first one I purchased was an Iron Man. I think it was one that George Tusker drew. And just before Barry Smith did his retelling of the origin with Roy Thomas, I think it was. And to me, I was really attracted by the color of the cover. And I thought 20 cents, I was sort of humming and hawing, 20 cents as opposed to the English comics, which were 10 cents or 12 cents at the time. And so I thought, that's double the price. You don't get as many pages of comics. You only get about 17 or 18 pages as opposed to 40 of the Pommy comics. But I gave it a try, and from then on, I was hooked.
Well, it looks like we might have lost Nat briefly. So I guess you're stuck with me, and we'll try. Here he comes, coming back. There you go, Nat. You're back, mate. It's the beauty of the live stream. So you were excited. You were hooked on that. Hey, this is what happens. This is the fluidity of the show.
So you lost me for a moment, mate. Did you?
Nah, look, don't worry about it.
Pardon me?
Hey, that it's the fluidity, man. And we'll get back into it. We were hooked on the colors. You were like bang into it, like 20 cents versus 10 cents. Yeah. Oh, hello, Darren. How are you, buddy? We're both going well. Thank you for checking in. Yeah. So back to you anyway, Nat. Sorry, mate.
So what happened? We lost contact, did we, a little while ago?
Sometimes
anyway,
the internet drops out, mate. It just happens. It does happen. So don't feel too bad about it, mate. It's.
Yes. The other thing too I can think of too as growing up, Leigh, is the newspaper. We used to get the afternoon newspaper in Brisbane, and there were all these comic strips. And I must say I was fascinated by the comic strips, and there was the Pots, there was the Peanuts, and they had Garth, and my favourite at the time was Garth. I liked the adventure strip. It seemed to grab me, and I think it was probably helped by the fact that we used to get the newspaper every afternoon. We didn't get the morning courier mail, so my knowledge of something like Air Hawk, for example, was pretty well. I had no knowledge about Air Hawk because we didn't get the courier mail, but getting the Telegraph was wonderful because there was some lovely strips there, some pantomime strips called Louis, I can remember, and then the Australian became the Sunday Australian, and my father subscribed to that, and inside that there was a wonderful array of classic comic strips. There was Tintin, there was Pogo, and I recall as a child cutting these out of the newspaper and putting them in a pile. I don't know what happened to them. My mother probably thought, let's get rid of this trash. And my son's collecting and cutting out.
They ain't no Spider-Man, she was probably thinking. I can't read these little things in the loo.
Yeah, that's it. We used to, in the toilet, actually, we used to have a little, it was a little container where comics were placed. So if you had a time, so if you had to do a big job, you had some entertainment while you were.
Oh, man.
Anyway, so comics were everywhere. But the only place comics weren't, though, is at school. The school kids were into TV. And I remember quite clearly in grade 3, I was ostracised because I didn't have tea and I didn't know who Astro Boy was, because all the kids of my class were into Astro Boy. Astro Boy bounds away, whoa!
Yeah.
So I didn't know anything about them, and I tried to sort of explain them to share with them the passion I had for the comics that I was reading, but to no avail. I was unable to convince them otherwise. There you go.
Oh, that's a bugger. But it's man, I can see you're still vibing with passion, though. It's like it's amazing. I've spoken about it to people previously on Chinwags and that, but one of the things that I sorely miss now are like the book exchanges and the secondhand bookstore where you could go and there were just
Yes,
beautiful
yeah.
styles of comics and that, you know, like for a young
Yes.
person who, you know, was only just in a part-time job or getting money from, you know, the washing machine when, you know, the change would drop out and like, you know, like any way you could, mate, you know what I mean? Like to buy those comics.
Yes.
Book
Yes.
exchange were
Yes.
beautiful things, man, you know, like where you could just
Yes.
oh, so many good memories of book exchanges, man. I used to love them, you know, walking in there and that smell of like the old paper and stuff, you know,
Yes. Yes.
and oh man, I always used to wonder how many books did those bookshop, you know, like exchange owners read. It's like, yeah,
Yes.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's been a beautiful
Yeah.
thing.
You're right, Lee. Too. I mean, that's one thing that I still do today. About you were talking about smell. I love getting a new comic and having a sniff.
Oh, don't,
And
man,
I
so
know
do
that
I.
sounds.
I've met a brother. I think everyone else looks at me like I'm weird because man, I stand in like some bookshops, man, where you can, you know, like they're not in
Yeah. Yeah.
acid-free.
Yeah.
We'll just keep this between, we'll keep this between us, man. And I get a little whiff there,
Yeah.
mate. You know, I've seen people looking like, get a load of this guy
There's
smelling coffee.
nothing like it. There's nothing like it. Anyone out there listening and watching, get out a comic and smell it.
Oh, you have a big old woof of that print, mate. Beautiful. It's like,
Yes, yeah, that's it.
oh man, I thought it was just me, but God, I feel better now, Nat.
No,
Thank
no,
you.
not at all.
You know, oh, yeah, you know,
Uh,
I feel
so-
really good. I
so-
feel like I've let something off of my chest that I feel like's been hidden from people for so long, man.
never be ashamed, Lee. Just
Oh.
keep sniffing,
Mate.
Anyway, look, maybe
I'm not gonna be ashamed anymore, Nat. I'm just gonna walk around smelling everything. Maybe not people, but you know, if they've got a book, just dive onto them, and you know, like I'm just, you know, Nat
that's
told.
That's it. Oh,
Man,
so
that's cool.
let me move on a little bit, Lee, because there's well, because I had all this influence about comics. You know, when I was in grade 7, I thought, you know what I'm going to do when I grow up, I'm going to become a cartoonist. I thought that's the life for me. I want to draw and make people laugh and do some cartooning, and so in high school, I organised a little group where you know, in lunch hours, I asked people if they were interested in coming along to have a little discussion about comics, and that was really quite well attended by one of the teachers and a few of the other kids. And so I realised, you know, that I wasn't alone. And you've got to remember too, this was before the comic book stores. The people, I guess, in the 60s were. If they were comic fans, I guess they did it in private, and they didn't really. There wasn't much in the way of a community as such as we know now.
Yeah.
So I found that really good to know that there was someone this is in high school now, the early high school. There were people there who were just as passionate as comics as I was, which was a real revelation for me, and. Also in the I think it was one of the Australian newspapers. They had an article about a guy who collected comics, and they had a photograph of him and his comic collection, and it was John Ryan, and I decided to write to John Ryan and just ask him a little bit about, you know, just you know, what is the process of getting a comic published in Australia. And he sent me a really lovely letter, which I still have, and telling me about his passion for comics and how he felt that the reporter who'd done the story was you know, he went a little bit off topic. John felt, you know, he wasn't, and he said, you know, he could understand why politicians took journalists with a bit of a wide berth, because he felt he wasn't really reported well. He had a passing reference to, I think, Captain Atom, and the headline of the article was about Captain Atom, and John really wasn't really interested in talking about that. He just wanted to talk about more generally about Australian comics. Anyway, nonetheless, John wrote back to me and asked me if I'd be interested in going to to visit him, and I ended up he ended up sending me a big package of his monographs, and inside the monographs he had some details about some of his early research. This is before he did panel by panel. We're talking about 1973 here.
Yeah.
And one of the monographs that he enclosed in there was about John Dixon and Air Hawk, and some of the he did. And I was really touched by the fact that he actually sent it to me, for starters. The fact that he was passionate about it, to say that he planned to write a book about his passion, and that got me thinking. I suppose it sort of stuck it with me for quite some time. And I have to say that of the two people that greatly influenced my way of thinking in so far as publishing goes, was my father and was John Wright, because they both pointed me in that direction without me realizing when I was still a teenager. I was still keen on cartooning, and I spent a lot of my time drawing in my spare time. And at that time we were living at Bribie Island, and I suppose I was drawing pictures of surfers, and I used to sell them to the kids on the bus, because we used to travel by bus from Bribie to Caboolture, which was about half an hour journey. And selling those cartoons, and on weekends I was practicing by drawing comic strips, with the hope of one day maybe getting it syndicated, and a few things like that. My very first published cartoon was in 1973 in the Aspley State High School yearbook, and I guess that encouraged me to think, that maybe I can make it as a cartoonist. And sadly, the real world, when you've got to sort of earn a living. My parents were sort of, even though they were very encouraging of my reading, they felt that there was no way that I'd ever become a cartoonist. It wasn't practical, and I had to get a real job. And I suppose I was a little bit disappointed with that, and nonetheless, I decided to write a comic about the fact that I had to leave that sort of passion behind me, and that was the very first comic I published. And there's a copy here. You'll find a copy in the there's a copy in the National Library. It's because I sent a copy to John Ryan, and unbeknownst to me, he kept it, and it's within all his comics collection in the National Library. It remains there, so I was pretty chuffed.
Yeah, man. That's a beautiful thing to be able to reach out. It would have taken some courage then from a young Nat too to reach out to his hero. But what a gift, man. Do you know what I mean? To get this package from from him, that must have just blown your mind, man.
Oh, look, it was fabulous, Lee. It really was, and I've still got them. I kept them. They became important to me, because I guess it legitimized the hobby, I suppose. That comics weren't just something disposable like most people thought. And I suppose too, in the early Marvels, in the 1970s, you used to have adverts for back issues of comics, and I started to realize, that there was a market for them. I mean, I think you could buy a Spider-Man 1 for $20 or something like that if you had $20. And so there was a value placed on comics. They weren't just disposable, they weren't just childish. And I think John's monographs really highlighted that to me. He was passionate about Australian comics, and he valued them, and felt, that they were important enough to write about them, and which is what he did. I mean, he contributed to the World Encyclopedia of Comics. All of the Australian entries there were written by John, and by that time I was in work. I'd found a bit of work, and it wasn't anything to do with comics. And sadly, I think my dreams, I felt, were slipping away back in those days. And where do I go from here? So. And look here, this is where we can branch into other topics, Lee, because around about around about 1977, and probably a little up until about 1979. There was a period of my life where I suppose I left home, I left Queensland, I moved down to Adelaide, and I got into a totally different scene altogether, and that was one of drugs, and I spent 9 months in 1980, where I was homeless by choice, and lived on the streets and travelled around the country as a bum. One of my plans in high school was not just necessary to be a cartoonist, but also I used to daydream and look at the wonderful blue sky outside. And one of my dreams and one of my ambitions back then was to be a bum, and just to live on the street. And I know that sounds really weird, but anyway, I guess I lived my dream. I decided to leave Adelaide, and I left Adelaide really for this express purpose of actually I left Brisbane to go to Adelaide in order to give up my drug habit, and I ended up in Adelaide with even a greater drug habit, and so the idea was to go home.
Cool. Well, looks like we've lost Nat again. Hopefully he'll pop back up, because I've got to tell you, if you're listening, this is getting very interesting. Nat, welcome back, mate. Don't stress. Let's get back into it. You've gone to Adelaide to get off the drugs, but you got on them. You wanted to be a free man, you know.
I wanted to be a free man. That's it. Yeah, that's it. You're right, Lee. So there was a period of time where I was living on the streets, and I travelled around the country hitchhiking, which is something you could do these days. I don't know. I don't see too many hitchhikers these days, but I managed to get around the country and managed to get off the drugs, which I think was a good thing. No regrets there. And and then I guess getting back into the work sphere, I also had a wife then, and I also had. She was expecting my first child, and so that changed everything. You know, I no longer had a desire for drugs. You know, they just weren't in my scene anymore. I just had to leave them alone. I had to become a responsible father. I think my attendance at work improved. I became a nurse, and my absenteeism just dried up. I had a responsibility to another human being. And that totally changed me. Becoming a dad was one of the best things in my life to change things and work things around, which you know, it's wonderful. And I've got a lovely family now, and I it's just wonderful. And grandchildren, it's just family life to me is just wonderful. I can't express that enough. You know, having all these kids and all these grandkids. It just gives joy to my life. They really do, and I feel really blessed. However, when I first got when we were expecting, I was living in Canberra. I was nursing in Canberra, and my wife found that too cold, and so the idea was to leave Canberra, and we came up to Brisbane, where it was a little bit warmer and there was a little bit more family support in order to raise the child. But still, in the back of my mind, then there was this ticking thing, you know, that I wanted to draw comics and publish comics. Now, I think because John felt that there was a need for Australian comics, I think, you know, it sort of bubbled in my brain, you know, that we've got to produce Australian comics. And one thing I want to say here is that around about this time, this is just before the specialty stores came into being. But I think in all parts of the country, there was a little undercurrent of people like me who felt there was a need to publish some local comics. And the people in Adelaide will probably remember Willow Papers, and the people in Melbourne will probably remember Ink Spot that was put out by Minotaur when they were just a little. I think Phil Bentley and the other guys were just selling from their garage, and in Sydney, I guess there was Gerard Carr, who was just doing all these wonderful comics and getting them out on the newsstands. In Brisbane, when I came up here, there was Ian Gould, and Jason Paulus was just starting out, and Graham Cliff, who were in a little group together who wanted to publish comics there. And so there, and in Canberra, just before I left Canberra, there were guys there. There was Peter Markman and Mike Priest and Peter Bollinger, guys in Canberra who were keen on, on producing comics. So I think in all areas around the country, there was this little bubble of creativity of comics who were just coming to the fore. And I think it was a wonderful time just to start getting into that medium again. And it was the beginning of what we now know, I suppose, is the revival of the Australian comic industry, if you want to call it an industry. Yeah.
Well, I've
heard
people in the past have recognised it as an industry because they do suggest that it is industrious. All of the people that create and publish their own work and self-publish, and as you were saying, when you do love something, it is compulsive, isn't it? It just stays. It's that itch that you can't get rid of. It's always there. Even if you step away from it for a year or two, you still somehow find yourself, being drawn back into it and things. And Nat, another thing I'd just like to say, man, is I greatly appreciate you sharing that story about your troubles and your addiction. And I too, I'm an alcoholic, so I've into my third year sobriety, so I understand what it is to go through breaking that habit, mate, and finding the will and those little areas in life that you need to improve in order to keep going. So congratulations on that, man. When he comes back, we'll continue that conversation. But I don't know, send in some comments. This is really good. I'm having a ball here. Nat, yeah, man, but congratulations for getting through it, dude. And much admiration for anyone out there that's struggling with any sort of substance abuse. Go and get help, and there's people out there that love you, So, good things can come from it. You just got to believe in yourself and try hard. So back to you, Nat. You're saying that, your comic book drawing didn't feel like it was going because at this stage you're a dad with the young fella. Your wife, you've moved back to Brisbane for family, a little bit more support, like being young parents as you would have been at that stage. You're nursing. This Australian comic book scene, you notice, is starting to bubble up, and there's people, pushing through and putting things out there. So take us from there, man. What were your feelings at this point? Where did you head?
Yeah, Leigh,
Well, and I guess we'll come back to that question. It's like, don't you love the internet, hey? The old fluidity. Hey, this is the fluidity of the show, Matt. I got you covered, brother. Don't you worry about that. I'm zoned in on you tonight, mate. So it's like, you're not going anywhere. We're finishing this story. So take us from when you got to Brizzy, mate.
Okay, well, there's just one thing I didn't dwell on, but I'll just say this very briefly. Just before I left Adelaide, I had an inkling about something, and I thought to myself, I'd read what John Ryan had written about John Dixon and Air Hawk, and by that stage, I discovered Air Hawk. I discovered that in a hostel in Brisbane before I left for Adelaide, and I started to read the daily adventures, and I was quite hooked really on the adventures. And so when I was in Adelaide, just before I left, I wrote to John Dixon's agent, and I asked Brian Foley, Brian, is there any chance of us putting a volume of Air Hawk things into a comic? And he wrote back and he gave me some details, and then I did my period of traveling around. But when I was in the early 80s, when I was keen on publishing again, I put out a comic called the Australian Comics Group. I don't have a copy here to show you, but it was just a photocopied comic. Really, it contained some of the artists of the time. There was a guy called John Hunter from Brisbane, Ian Eddy from Melbourne, a couple of the guys from Canberra, and there was a story there that was scripted by myself called Hero Australia. Anyway, I published it, and I sent a copy.
Internet gods. And Don Ticchio, you're 100% right. Yep. And hang on, we got Danny Nolan here. Nat, how did Monty Webb become so important in your life? We'll come back to that. Thank you for the question, Danny.
Sure. Yeah, I'll come to that. But in the meantime, where were we? No. Anyway, that's right. I sent this comic down to Phil down in Melbourne, and he wrote back a polite letter, but basically saying, your comic sucks. Let's put it that way. And Phil and I get on, so let's not say there's any bad.
Now everyone out there, thank you for your comments too. Okay, Nat. We're there. We're there. If you're with me, I'm just letting everyone know. I'm appreciating their comments, but I'm giving you your space so we can get through this story. Okay, and much love and harmony to everyone contributing. I haven't forgotten you. But back to you, Nat.
Where are we?
Well, we were talking.
Are we there?
Yeah, we were talking about your mate told you that your comic book was pretty average, and you said there's no bad blood because your mate's now. So that's the point.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, no, that's right. No, I've got the total respect for Phil, and he told me that it was pretty crappy, and so my desire to publish was still there, and so. This is we're talking about 82 then, and I was saying to myself, if I can't do something myself creatively because I'm crap, I've got to accept that. And so ever since then, I've never drawn or really written a comic since then. Oh no, I have, but I'll come to that. But I thought to myself, rather than me publishing anything that's second rate, why not publish something that's really top class? And on that basis, I got back in touch with Brian Foley, John Dixon's agent, and I had a desire to publish Air Hawk. And Brian gave me the okay, John gave me the okay, and in fact, John drew a wonderful illustration, which ended up being on the front cover of my very first Air Hawk comic. Can you see that? I'm not sure if that's
come the other way, visible, Nat. But there we go. Shane's brought this. Yep, hold him right there. Look at that.
Yeah, there you go. So that was published in 1988. Now, prior to this coming out, I was in touch with Gary Deller, who was starting up his Reverie Comics, and so I put Gary in touch with John because Gary wanted some filler material for his comic, and so Gary was able to get in touch with Brian Foley, and he that's where he ended up getting some of the Air Hawk stories in the Reverie. So they were sort of episodic, I think he had part of a story in one issue, and that continued on to the next story. So I, and I was okay with that. I sort of gave Gary the okay. Why don't you do that? And then after that, John asked me if I'd make sure that I just do it one complete episode per comic, and so I managed to get the second issue out. There we go. There it is.
Bring it back up, Shane. Full screen. Yeah, look at that.
Which way? Yep.
That way. Yeah, that's the way.
There you go.
That's beautiful.
Now, John was kind enough to draw the illustrations, the covers for those. I did pay him. And I wasn't really satisfied with. They were both 500 copy print runs. I wasn't really happy with that, and so at that time, I was in touch with Gary Chalker, and Gary at that time was doing his comics with Dave DeVries, and the cyclone comics industry was sort of starting to bubble over. And so Gary and I, and back in these days, this is before emails and before phone calls, because STD phone calls back in those days were just
I remember,
expensive.
mate, you know, like $5 for 1 minute, you know.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and then you got the
that's
special
right.
Sunday rate where between 8:30 and quarter to 8, you could talk to
Yeah.
anyone for $50 for 15 minutes or whatever it was. Bargain, you know, like I remember.
So anyway, I got in touch with Gary and I said, Gary, you know, would you be interested in publishing an Air Hawk story? I'll pay a proportion of it if you do another proportion of it. And he just put out two cyclone specials, and I just put out 2 Air Hawks. So we decided to get together and make a Air Hawk super special under the cyclone banner, and that's where this one came about.
Oh, full screen. Come on, Sis. Magic Man. Look at that. That's beautiful, man. Have you got signatures on that too, Nat? Have you got, are they signed up? Oh, no, that's just it. Is it? I can't.
Signed where?
I just thought there were signatures, but it's just your corner box up there in the top.
No, that's up here. No, that's just John's logo.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Anyway, so Gary and I made that a co-production, and that's you know, I was very proud of that. That one got on the newsstands. It was my very first newsstand comic, and many thanks to Gary for supporting me that way. And I guess I supported him by having a different sort of comic in his stable. Now, I'm going to backtrack a little bit here. When I was in Canberra before coming back to Brisbane, I decided to write to the Courier Mail. Sorry, it was the Canberra Times. The Canberra Times had a new comic strip called Swamp, and I just loved it. It appeared, I think, once a week, but I thought the humour was really good, and I didn't realise at the time that it was done by a guy in Brisbane, Gary Clark, and so I wrote to Gary after the newspaper supplied me his address, and his wife Yvonne wrote back to me thanking me for the mail, and anyway, Gary and I became close friends when I moved up to Brisbane, and Gary told me about the Australian Black and White Artists Club, and he said, you know, you've really got to join that if you want to get a front row seat with all the best cartoonists in the country. And I thought, what a great idea. So I joined up. And this will answer Don's question from before. So I joined up and I became a member of the Australian Black and White Artists Club. And my very first meeting, it was in Sydney, and I stayed on the couch at Gary Chalker's place. And I tried to get Gary to join too. He didn't do that until later. But anyway, I went to the very first annual the Stanley Awards. It was I think it was the third one that they'd held. It was in Sydney, and it was just fabulous. They put me right at the back, and I thought, you know, what do they put me in the back for? They put me back with the old fellas, and the old fellas in the comics game. And I'm talking about Jim Russell. I'm talking about Dan Russell. I'm talking about Tony Rafferty. I'm talking about Vane Lindsay. I was with all of these old fellas.
You're with the treasure, mate. Yeah.
and at that very first dinner, with his wife, 2 tables down, was Monty Webb. So I went up to Monty and I said, Monty, I love your work, you know, but you know what you got to do, Monty, is one day you've got to publish that Ned Kelly and put it in a volume. And he said, we'll talk about that later. Anyway, so he was really open to the idea, and it was just wonderful to be in that club, because there were the old fellas in the club who had all of this history. They were so willing to share about some of the fellas from the past, and that was what I was interested in. I wanted to know about all the fellas. Now, John wasn't there. He was a member, but by that time he'd moved to the States. So I didn't get to meet him, and he'd won a couple of awards the couple of years before I went to the annual award night. But nonetheless, I just enjoyed it. And you know, I mean, of those fellas I met that night, the only one still going is Vane Lindsay. And what a man. Vane's now 103 and just fabulous. Anyway, that's that and we had a great conversation, and I asked Vane if he'd ever write an introduction to one of my books. I asked Peter Foster if he'd write a little article for in one of my comics, and they both agreed. It was just, you know, something you did, you know, for people who were passionate about comics, as I was.
Yeah.
And you know, and now I guess, you know, I'm still in it's now called the Australian Cartoonists Association,
Yeah.
and now I'm one of the old blokes. And so if there's any young fella there that wants to know something or wants to talk about old comics or old times, they can always come to me. I'm always happy to yarn about it because, you know, I'm one of the, I guess they pass the baton to me. And so it's my responsibility now to pass the baton to the young ones. And it's nice to see some of the people like Dean Rankin there and Paul Mason, you know, the young fellas who are doing comics now. They've joined the Australian Cartoonists Association, and they're doing great things as well. And it's just wonderful because editorial cartoonists probably won't survive because of the way the media is, you know, and the comic strips, sadly, they've gone by the wayside. But the people who want a cartoon and the people that want to make people laugh and the people who want to do stories in comics, they still persist. People still want to hear stories, and they want to hear our stories. And so that's why I think the ACA is important, you know, and anyone who joins is going to meet some of these old fellas like me, and they're going to meet some young fellas who are up and coming, and most people are really willing to share and impart information and knowledge. And that's why I get such a buzz out of being a member. Anyway. Anyway,
Oh, man,
kept on going.
This is great, Nat. You just keep going, man. I'm going to sit back here and just enjoy your company for the evening, mate. Like, I love to learn this stuff too. So drop it. Just tell us everything.
So here are some of the other comics I did. Now, this one here, Gary helped me design this one. And I had a few subscribers who just hated it. They felt it was a little bit too risque, shall we say. And I thought by having it in the newsstands, it would probably sell heaps of copies. But the sad story is that it didn't sell much at all. In fact, I lost quite a bit of money on it. But there you go. So following that, I decided to do a comic for the Americans. And so I released this Air Hawk for the American audience.
Yep.
And you know what? You look at that cover. And you know what John Dixon told me?
No.
John Dixon told me, well, you told me to make this a PG. So John Dixon told me what he thought about the cover. And the reason for that is that I didn't get a proof copy. And anyone who's out there who publishes comics, publishes books, make sure you get a proof copy, because the printer decided just to print off my guide rather than what I was wanting for the cover. And so this was just a painted cover that I send them as a guide. And you'll also notice down the bottom there, I don't know if you can, probably when you see it in person in real life, there's a lot of editing and changing of the original artwork that was done on that artwork. And John was a bit filthy with that. And you know, I don't blame him. It's one of those things. So you learn things by publishing. Nothing's ever perfect. And you learn. You really learn.
Has just said definitely worth joining the Australian Cartoonists Association. Thank you.
Good on you. Yeah. So anyway, that was around about 1990, and at that stage, I'd spent quite a bit of money on publishing those last three comics, and I lost quite a bit of money. I didn't make any money, and anyone who's tried to publish comics, if you try to do it in a way where you're going to make money, you may be disappointed, and I was certainly disappointed and lost a heap of money. And further to that, I'll be really honest about it. I lost my marriage, and so the marriage didn't work, and and from there, I guess I had a very dark period in my life, and I won't go into all of it because there's a lot of things there that a lot of people don't know about, and I probably won't talk about. But let's just say, suffice to say that for a period of time, I lost contact with my children, and I didn't know where they were, and things just weren't going too well. And so, in the depths of despair, I could have done two things. I could have gone back to having a drug habit, or I thought there was a better idea, and so I decided to write a comic book. I didn't want to illustrate it. I wanted to write one, and so this is the end result here. This came out in 1993. Now, for those people who don't know rugby league football, Wally Lewis is
was the king.
Yeah, well, some people call him the king, but I don't think New South Wales people would say that. But anyway, so I was able to. I went to one of the Black and White Artists Club meetings in Brisbane, and I ran into a young cartoonist called Joanne Applegate at the time. That was her name, and she was just wanting to break into comics, and so she illustrated the comic for me, and we published another comic of 500 editions. I was hoping the cover would have been in cover, but it didn't happen. But I think the purpose of the comic for me was some therapy, I suppose, to try and work out where the future was going to go without contact with my loved ones. And sometimes in the depths of despair in life, there's always a little beacon of joy that you don't realize is there. And things weren't going too well. I quit one of my jobs, and I didn't know what to do, and I ended up working in a nursing home, which I thought would be the worst thing in my life. But I left because I think there was frustration about my family not having contact. There was frustration about, feeling the management weren't listening to what we wanted. And anyway, I ended up going to this nursing home, and who should I meet there but my present wife? And that's that. I guess that's the nice story. And then slowly over the years, my engagement with my children has returned, and we just have a wonderful relationship. I just really treasure my daughters. I treasure all members of my family, the grandkids, all of them. They just they mean so much to me now, and I think it's through that joy and working hard and getting ourselves established, my wife and I, and getting a new home. It's then the passion for comics came back again. It's something that doesn't go away.
Yeah. Nat, I'd like very much. Sorry to introduce yourself there, but thank you so much for sharing that story with me, man. Because that's I'm very grateful for that, and you feeling comfortable to tell me that, man. And
sure.
It is an amazing thing, though. What creativity helped you. Looking back on what I know about you now, even though we're in the middle of your story, wonderful decision on your behalf to pursue the Wally Lewis writing, mate, and find the young author artist. Now, Ian C. Thomas has just got a comment. It's rare for anyone to talk about the impact of our creative lives on our marriages, but it can be immense. Thank you, Nat. And
thanks, Ian. Yeah, thanks, Ian. Yeah, it's. I guess comics aren't done in isolation, though, are they? I guess there are so many factors that bring into us when we're creating, and for me, writing the Wally Lewis story was cathartic, I suppose. Finding an artist who was willing to illustrate it was just a joy. I know Joanne used the artwork as a basis for getting employment for Queensland newspapers. So she herself used it as a stepping stone to go further. And she became very successful. I think she managed to be the president of the Black White Artists Club too for a period of time as well. So a lot of good things came from it, and I think sometimes when we're in despair about things, there's always joy to be found. That's my belief in any case. But you know, comics aren't in isolation. I mean, there's so many other things too. I'm also very passionate about music. I like music, not so much opera or classical or rap, but any other genre I'm quite happy about. And so that's part of my life too. But I mean, comics are the main thing. But there's all these different things that infuse our lives. I mean, another thing too, I'm quite passionate about. I'm passionate about rugby league. I mean, when I grew up in the 1970s, when I had my own little pocket radio, I used to listen to Queensland playing New South Wales, and we got flogged. We got flogged every year. Every year we got flogged. And so when State of Origin came about, who was I going to back? Queensland, my oath.
Why?
So these days, I still remain very passionate about my rugby league because, you know, I just remember the times when we got beaten by so many, and also by our own players, because a lot of them were lured over to New South Wales and they were paid. They were paid by the pokie machines, which we didn't have in Queensland. So I remain quite passionate about about the rugby league, to the point that we had a 100th anniversary centenary for the Australian Cartoonists Association just a little while ago. And why couldn't I go? Because it's on the same night as State of Origin 3.
Oh, Nat, you went with the rugby league, mate. Oh, you know, now there's some passion. We're seeing two sides of you here, man. It's like, it's hey, you know, you gotta follow what what your thing is. So it's
that's it.
Ian just mentioned something before in a comment that and you being so beautifully open a moment ago about how you know, creativity in terms of comic books and stuff like that, like it can be isolating. It can be, if you wish it. And it's beautiful to hear. It's sad because I'm one of those people that, as I've tried to pursue my creative and artistic side, I've had a relationship breakdown over the last few years because I wasn't present enough for it. I decided to put everything into drawing and creating. And people that I meet, and like not everyone, people are lucky. You know, like if you are a creator out there and you do have a partner that you know, like supports you and understands that this is it's something within you. It's part of you. When you get like the compulsion to do this stuff, it's not. I would say, from my perspective, it's not being selfish. It's just part of you. You have to do it. But if you do have a partner that supports you and backs you and understands you and loves you, you know, very much, to pursue that interest, then man, go and give them a hug, because you're like the luckiest people in the world. So yeah, I just wanted to add to that. You know, from
sure. I have to say there, Leigh, is that I do have a wife who allows me that freedom. Does she understand the comic medium? No. Does she really find that that I put that before her at times? Yes. Is it fraught with danger in a relationship? Absolutely. Because you know, I was going to come and talk about that later, but I can talk about it now. I believe that I've got a wonderful wife who allows me that creative freedom to do these things, although she does feel that she doesn't get the what's the word for it? she doesn't end up having the emotional support that I ought to give her at times, and I think that can cause problems because, you know, it's hard to try and strike that balance, you know, between creativity, responsibility to your employment, and responsibility to your relationship, and it's trying to juggle all of those moving parts where you can produce something just really wonderful, as well as preserving what's really important. And it's a really tough battle, and I do think at times that my wife has had to go second fiddle, and I know that's not really a nice thing for her, and I know that sometimes she'll vocalize the resentment for that, but nonetheless she's stuck with me for better or for worse, and here we are still together. And I'm internally grateful for the wonderful support that she has given me, even though she doesn't understand the medium. And even though you talk about my books behind me that seem quite ordered, in front of me is total chaos. And I won't show you, but one of the bugbears of her life is the fact that I'm in our double garage. We don't have a car in our double garage, but we have plenty of boxes of books, plenty of records, plenty of CDs, plenty of short boxes that are in piles to my right here that drive her nuts.
Well, mate, who needs vehicles when you've got books and creativity and music and the theatres of your mind to take you into places? You know what I mean? Who needs reality of like these metal things that take you from A to B? We don't need that, you know. Like we can just get there, you know.
Well, I still need a vehicle, and it's out parked out in front.
I just park it outside.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
all right.
but
Ian,
you know.
Nat, Ian's just said, Nat, I take my hat off to your publishing empire. So,
thank you. Thank you.
We're getting
there. Thank you, Ian. I must say too that you know that when
Nat, we got Danny Nolan here. He says the risk of creators to fail is something that their passions often mask. So it's not something they don't factor into the equation when chasing their goals. And no, it's not.
Yeah,
Danny.
True.
It's
true. That's true. I must say though, the one thing about this double garage with all of its books here, some of my grandkids love coming here and they say, and this is where we came to before, Leigh, they say, "Doesn't this smell great?"
Yeah. Yeah. Hey? Oh, Nat. Like, man, you get those little guys smelling, man. Whatever you do, you throw them in there, even for a half hour. We get them, you know, smelling like paper, man. That's where it gets to you, mate. You know, you get that whole, they should cologne that stuff, dude.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but
so,
you know, like maybe
where do we go from here? I guess we're going sequentially, aren't we, with the way life is going? And
we can go any way you wish, Mr. Carmichael. I'm having an absolutely lovely time, mate. So feel free.
All right. So I suppose what I could talk about, there's nothing that's always straightforward in publishing. And some of the problems you encounter, I mean, I guess I've had a few things that haven't gone quite right. I mean, first of all, there's occasions when I haven't proofread a book, and much to my shame, I had a book and that I did publish, and I might as well, I've got show and tell books here, you know. So this is a book that I was,
mate, there you go.
I was quite pleased with this. I was pleased with this book. And I didn't get it proofread, and I really kicked myself for not doing so. It's an anthology, which was designed to raise money for Beyond Blue, and what I did is I wrote to male and female creators in Australia, asking them if they'd be willing to put in for the anthology, and to limit it to 5 pages maximum of a story they felt was important to them, or something with the theme of Australia. And I was really overwhelmed by the wonderful response by the creative community. This is back about 10 years ago now that came out. And It was important. I managed. At that stage, I was working in the psychiatric emergency centre where I've worked for the last 13 years at the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital, and I was able to get the mental health nurse of the year to write an introduction for me. We get on quite well, and she wrote just a small, short piece. The only thing I didn't do with the book is I didn't get it proofread, and to my absolute horror, Dave Dye. I think he rang me up or he emailed me and told me that I'd got the sequence of his story muddled up. And instead of page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it was page 1, 2, 3, 5, 4. And I think there were other mistakes too. I forgot to include Greg Gates's drawing of himself. I think I got Sarab, my friend Sarab, I got his name wrong. In the credits, and little things like that I should have picked up, which disappoint me to this day. And so if you're doing a book, folks, if you're making a book, get it proofread. It's really important. I was talking about it before with that Air Hawk one, but it's one of those things. That's some of the problems you get with publishing. Another one I've had over the years, I suppose, is that my wife said, she didn't really want me to publish it. My first book was this one here, as a book, as far as books go, and I did this one in 2010. I wanted to do this because inside there, I included a lot of biographical work about John Dixon. I enclosed 5 complete stories, and I also went to a lot of people that were important to John in his life and asked them to tell me, how did you find John? Can you tell me something about John? And they all managed to write a little article. There was his daughter, his son, his manager, one of the guys that used to work for him on the Sunday newspaper strip, a really close family friend wrote, John Ryan's wife at the time wrote something, and everyone wrote a little bit too. His sister wrote something. They all wrote a little bit about John, and I didn't tell him that's what I was doing. I told him I was just putting out a volume of Air Hawk, but inside the volume was all these wonderful things about John, and also an interview with John, telling us about what materials he used, what sort of papers, a bit of background about his history, and anyway, we got the book published, and then we went to America, and the first person I wanted to give a copy to was John Dixon. So I managed to see John, just a couple of years before he passed, and I was able to present him, the book, and he sat down there and started reading it. We just had dinner, and he just wanted to get away from the dinner table, and he wanted to keep on reading what people wrote about him. And it was just a wonderful thing. It was just really nice. He was just, he didn't expect it. And it was just a wonderful surprise. And it made the holiday, I suppose. I didn't think much of Los Angeles. After that, we went to New York. We spent 10 days there, and that made the holiday special too.
Yeah, man, that sounds like that would have been an amazing experience, though. Being there with him while
Yes, yeah. It was I'll tell you a story too about in New York. This is something that I got to tell you. There was a cartoon exhibition on in New York, and I said to my wife, "I've got to go and see this." It was Will Eisner, and they had all of his originals, and I thought, "Oh, I'm in heaven." Will Eisner's original stuff, and it was all of the stuff from the 1940s and some of the later stuff. And I thought, how great is this? And my wife wasn't interested. She said, I'm going downstairs. I'll be waiting down there, and I'll come out when I see you. No worries. Yeah, righto. I don't care. I'm going to see Will Eisner. Anyway, so I go downstairs, and I want to rave about what I've just seen. And she told me, oh, don't worry about that. I've just seen Yoko Ono.
Oh, man. How's that for a day?
Yeah, that's it. So there you go. I missed out on seeing Yoko Ono, but my wife had the chance, and there you go. One of those
Well,
things.
that seems to me as I get older, like I sort of understand, like the importance of compromise, man. Like and so it seems like a bit of a win-win there for both.
Oh,
Like
yes, yeah.
what could have been potentially a little, like maybe antsy, like everyone came up roses. So
Yeah,
the
that's right.
universe
Yes,
provided.
yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
great, man. Yeah, that's
Yes.
fantastic. It's
So,
what
yeah.
do you when you said like with your proofreading with because I know it's obviously a very important thing. What do you like tend to have from what you've learned now? Do you, when you're doing your new comic books and stuff like that, do you have someone that you get to help you edit them, and or do you have a group of people that you go, hey, can you trusted confidants that like say, can you read this for me, or do you do it yourself? Or I mean, how did you do you give yourself a bit more time between the deadlines and the final print? Like how did you get around that
Well,
sort of
well, in regards comics, I suppose I was working to a deadline, so the proofreading wasn't really sent out elsewhere, if you know what I mean. I guess
yeah,
I proofread it, and sometimes that's where you make mistakes by thinking you know what you're reading when you're
yeah,
not.
yeah,
If you understand what I mean. So,
yeah,
but these days when I'm publishing a book, I don't have a deadline. I try not to have a deadline. I tend to send the material out or outsource it to other people to let them read. I mean, Roger Stitson's done one for me just recently.
yeah,
He's reviewing Iron Outlaw for me at the moment, and he's looked through the text there, made some suggestions. Not necessarily that we agree to all of them, but
mm,
and sometimes I've had a professional proofreader. It varies from book to book,
yeah, yeah,
and depending on what the material is. But I prefer that I don't proofread, because I think when I do proofread, I make mistakes.
yeah,
And I'll tell you, look, a very embarrassing one, and I'll publicly talk about it because I feel really bad about it. I've just very recently released another Airhawk comic. There we
yeah.
go. So,
There we go. Yeah,
and there are a lot of people that assisted with this one, and I wrote the credits inside the front page there, and I've got really editorial input and assistance. And the first person I've got on the list there is Jason McPherson, and I didn't pick it up. And Jeremy was very kind. I mean, I had to apologise profusely. How could I get Jeremy McPherson wrong and put Jason McPherson? And I felt really bad about that. But so even though I've had other people look at things, sometimes things like that get missed, and it really irritates me. I feel, it just. It's something that shouldn't happen, but sometimes does. And I know that in some of my other books that's happened as well. Some of my other comics that mistakes are made. I know what they are. I don't tell everybody, but those are the ones I have shared with you tonight. Are the major ones that trouble me, and they'll always trouble me. That and putting Jason instead of Jeremy will always trouble me, and I feel really bad about it. But I can't do much about it. So anyway, I was, and we were talking earlier about conflict between, relationships and the creative soul, and there's always external pressures of outside, and in the mid 1910s, what are we talking about? I guess about 2015 or so. There was a fairly major thing that happened inside our family, which I probably won't go into right now. But in order to work through that, I suppose for myself, I started doing crazy things, and by that I mean I was working a lot of late shifts in my psychiatry position, and so my shifts started at 2:15, and I used to start work at 1 o'clock. And my work day usually finished about 10:45, but being the nature of the job, I used to finish sometimes 11 o'clock, 11:15, and I'm still a fair distance from home, so I didn't get home until sometimes after midnight, and then my dear wife would stay up and wait for me. We'd have a conversation about the day, and so bedtime didn't finish and didn't arrive until about 1 o'clock in the morning. And during these times, with this external pressure about what was happening inside our family, I used to get up early in the morning. I'm talking about 6 o'clock in the morning, and started working on my Oi 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 comic. And I used to work from 6 o'clock in the morning up until around about 11 o'clock, sometimes even a bit later, till 11:30, when my wife said, you better have a break, you better have something to eat, get ready for work, and then off I'd go. And so I was doing crazy shifts. I was sort of starting at 6, until 1 o'clock in the morning. And I did that for a long period of time. And I think this is in order to try and put aside, let's put it that way. And those dramas now have subsided and everything's fine. But at the time, it was tough, really. And I think it was no tougher than on my wife Carleen, who I think put up with a lot. And what can I say? Yeah, I mean, the fact that she sort of, I think, was willing to stay the distance in the relationship is testament to her strength and her character. And I can only be forever grateful, because I was working flat out on these comics. I don't know. Do you want to see them all? I don't know. You've probably, I don't know if you've all seen them.
I can actually tell you, Nat, that I bought a few of those issues from the newsagents, mate, back in the day. So I've got them over in the portal.
Good on you, Leigh. That's good to know.
It's all right, mate.
That was the second. I'll just briefly tell you that I was really happy with this cover. That was done by Anton Emden, who gave me. I paid all the artists, and I made sure everyone got paid. It wasn't a great amount for everybody, but everyone got paid, and I allowed all the creators to retain copyright, because to me that's very important. And Anton, who drew that cover, surprised me at the Stanley Awards that year by giving me the original black and white artwork, and I was just blown away by his generosity. Wow. He only charged me half of what his normal fee is, and I was just so rapt. And if you look in the books in the background on that illustration, he's written Airhawk and Ned Kelly. So anyway, that was lovely. And then this one here was another favourite. That was a issue that featured all female artists in Australia, and I was honoured to have that one shortlisted in the ledgers as they were at the time. And then from the next issue, some of the artists were willing to do wraparound covers, and I was so pleased with this one here.
Well, Danny Nolan just said that Oi got him back into Australian comics, Nat. So there's someone else you influenced.
Oh, that's lovely. Oh, that's nice. That's really good. So anyway, that was and Dave actually wrote me a synopsis about this character on the front, and he had this idea that I thought was wonderful about doing a comics story about this character. And anyway, he was quite busy at that stage, and so he said he wasn't able to get back to it until much later. Anyway, a couple of years later, I wrote to Dave and said, whatever happened to that idea that you had for this comic for Oi Oi Oi? I mean, the magazine had finished by then, but Dave said he couldn't remember anything about it. But somewhere among my emails, I've got this really great big synopsis of a story that Dave had that I thought was just wonderful. Because he did that Uncle Silas for the Americans for Dark Horse, and this story that he had in his head was just something far superior to that. But
Yep.
anyway, he couldn't remember it, and I'll just have to dig it out and give it to him one day. But I think these days he's just so busy. I was really pleased with this one. This one had very limited distribution at the newsagents, and Tony Thorne did this wonderful story inside about the first Australian comic strip, and it's really dear to my heart. It's talking about the Indigenous population, the First Nations people, and some of the tragedies that befell them in Tasmania in particular.
Yep.
And this one here was one for Jeremy Staples. He had a comic zine festival in Toowoomba, so this one didn't get released on the newsagents. And the cover artist was, I'm trying to think of her name, isn't it terrible? I can't remember her name. But anyway, she did this wonderful cover. And I believe that after that, she was hired by Nicola Scott to colour all of her Wonder Woman comics. So it was... so I actually can't remember her name. Isn't it terrible? It's a Spanish name. Anyway, I think she's got married recently, and isn't that wonderful? There's another one that was a double-sided one, and you can see, you know, I like the covers that, you know, covered over to the back.
Yeah.
And then Alicia Jade and inside this comic, I'd always said I didn't want superheroes because I wanted to be an independent comic.
Yep.
And inside there, Franz Cantor and Andres Bergen drew the first issue of Magpie. Now, the second installment was in this issue here, and they were going to do a third one. And the idea was that, and this is where life gets in the way. So what happened is that we've got an 8-page story on the first issue. We had an 8-page story on that second one I just showed you, and we were going to do a third one, and that makes 24 pages. And the idea was to put them all together and market it to the Americans because I thought it would do really well. Anyway, I decided to come down to Melbourne to have a conversation with Franz and Andres to talk about that fact, about trying to get it all together for America. And we arranged to meet at a certain place in Melbourne at a certain time. And I think Franz and I both met there, but Andres wasn't there. And to my great shame, I was cursing him behind my back. I thought, what are you doing? You know, we made this arrangement. I come all the way down to Melbourne just to catch up, and you haven't shown up. And in my head, I was sort of, you know, thinking ill of him. And and Andres becomes the third great influence in my life, because unbeknownst to myself and unbeknownst to Franks, Andres had a medical episode, and I won't go into it because that's his personal life. But just to it just made me realise that there's more to things than just comics. There's a life outside of here, and Andres could have died. The poor bugger. He's you know, he hasn't really reached his peak like he was back in the day, back then. And I just felt embarrassed that I was thinking all these negative thoughts and awful thoughts about him simply because he hadn't made up a meeting with me. And you can't in life, I don't think you can sort of try and think, you know, you're going to make all these plans about what's going to happen and what you're going to do, because, you know, things get in the way. Life gets in the way. And it didn't happen. It didn't come to pass. We didn't do the third issue, the third episode. The guy spent some time in rehab trying to recover from his medical condition, and I felt totally embarrassed by my thinking. I mean, I didn't badmouth him to everybody, but in my heart I was badmouthing him, and I felt really bad. And he taught me a lesson: to be humble, to be a little bit more considerate of other people, that there's other things in their lives that are going on. And so it was a valuable lesson in life. I thought that I was taught by Andres, even though he didn't realise. Another issue which I was really pleased about was this one here. Now, I really like this cover because you know who it is, don't you? You know who did the cover?
Looks like a Lumsden.
It does, and it is.
Yeah,
And Glenn
yeah.
hadn't drawn any comics for years, and anyway, I convinced him to do a cover, and it's just I just really love the cover, and I love the comic. There's a lovely story. What I did with this issue is that there were some comics that I had from the 1980s that I hadn't published, and that was Ian Eddy, and I had some work from a guy in Adelaide, Jim Stratman, that I hadn't published that I wanted to publish, and so I decided to make a nostalgic issue, and I managed to get Ian's permission. Ian really wouldn't communicate with me, but I managed to get in touch with him via his brother, and that was the last published work of Ian before he sadly passed away. So that was a very special issue that I was able to put away. But and Leigh, I do thank you for purchasing them in the newsstands. I must say that they didn't sell well enough for me to be able to continue it, and that was a great disappointment. The only thing I can say is that I think I'll be, apart from Frew, I'll be the last Australian publisher to be on the Australian newsstands ever, because I don't think it's going to be viable unless someone's got a really good commercial property that'll sell. But these days, no one goes to the newsstands. I think the only way to sell Australian comics these days is probably via the specialised conventions, and even then, I think that the thousands that were sold back in the heyday have long gone. And these days, I think if you can sell 100 copies of a comic, then you're doing pretty well. If you can do more than that, then you can consider yourself with a bestseller.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was talking about. Am I monologuing too much?
Mate, Nat, I'm going to just say, sir, I am enjoying this immensely, mate. You have a wealth of knowledge and wonderful stories, and I'm enjoying it. Please continue
Okay.
At your leisure, mate.
Thank you so much, then, Leigh. So in one of my Air Hawk comics, I had a backup strip called Trundle. And I really liked Trundle, and it was a creation of Neil Madison. And Neil was a very prolific cartoonist that I met at the Australian Black and White Artists Club award nights. He was also a very good friend of Gary Clark's, who I was friendly with. And I asked Neil if he would be willing to allow the Trundle to be placed in the back pages of one of the Air Hawk comics that I did in the 1980s, and he agreed. And so I reapproached him later, asking if we could put the strips, because it only appeared in one newspaper in Australia. It wasn't a big seller. It wasn't like It's a Baby. It wasn't like I think he had a couple of other strips. St. Pip's. A lot of his strips were very popular in the newspapers, but Trundle wasn't. It didn't do too well. But anyway, Neil gave me the okay to go ahead. And so I put out this volume. Now,
there we go.
There we go. So, and what I love about it is that the strips are a pantomime strip. Here, I've got some up here actually. So, I don't know if you can see those.
Yeah, we can see that. Yeah, that way.
Yeah,
right there. Beautiful. Yeah.
So this is what some of them look like. And I just like, it was just a very gentle humour.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything too rough. And anyway, it's just the one I love giving to kids. And when we were at Comic Street last month, because I love the strip so much, and because it's for kids, we gave heaps away to some of the kids, because Neil's sort of left his comic strip career behind, and so I've got quite a few copies still left. Like I was saying, I've got a garage full of unsold books, It's such the nature of publishing. Now, that's what I was telling you before. I tend to wander. After I
We've got
published
Nat.
that,
We've got a comment here from Christopher Sequeira. Good evening, sir. Dang you, Nat Karmichael, laying down a challenge to publish in Australian outlets again. Nah, I think that's called an inspiration, Nat. Best to you. So, thank you, Chris, for your comments and popping back on the show, mate.
Thank you very much. So anyway, after I published that Air Hawk that I presented to John Dixon, my wife said, "You're not going to publish another comic book until you can get a distributor." So,
well, there you go.
You know, I don't want these comic books holding up our garage. And so, you know, I think, yeah, fair enough. So what did I do? I managed to get one. I got Dennis Jones and Company, and they were quite happy to distribute my books. And so that was just a wonderful joy that they were able to do that. And on that basis, I managed to get quite a few books into the bookstores. And here's one in particular that I loved.
Oh, yeah, look at that. Oh, Sis, bring that. Oh, man. Now here we go. Oh, Monty, very cool.
Yes. So now what happened? The background story to this one is that as you know, as I said earlier, I approached Monty at the award night and asked him if he'd be interested, and he said, look, he'd be interested in the idea. And so later on, after I'd published that first Air Hawk, I decided to write to Monty again and just ask him if he wants to revisit the idea and put all those strips in one volume. Anyway, I got the sad news really that Monty wasn't well, and that you know, he was on his last legs. So in fairness to the family, I told them, you know, look, I'll just shelve the idea for a while. So Monty did eventually pass away, and I gave them a good year to grieve, you know, for Monty. I mean, he was a good age, and he'd done so much work for Australian comics. Each January the 5th, which is his birthday, I like to announce, you know, what I consider to be the best Australian comic of the year, and I put it on my web blog page. So I allowed them to grieve. The family were okay with the idea, or rather, Dorothy, his wife, was okay because she was at the dinner when I first met Monty, and it was given the okay, which was just wonderful. So we managed to. This is the first time I ever kick-started something, and we managed to get the whole thing into one volume, and it was a wonderful bit of work. I had Michael Dukovic who started the design for me.
Yep.
And the printer became a little bit how would you say? The printer was a little bit fussy about what he wanted in regards to dimensions of the book, and Michael was quite upset with that and said, you know, that he could shove it. So I didn't want to shove it because I wanted to finish the book. So I ended up looking online for someone that could help me. And at this stage, I hadn't published Oi Oi Oi. But anyway, I found a young guy called Ryan McDonald Smith. And he wasn't the cheapest guy to employ, but he had a really nice way of communicating in his email. And he asked, I think we decided to make arrangements to meet. He lived at Logan and I lived on the Redcliffe Peninsula, which is about an hour's drive away. So I decided to go and visit him in his home, and just a wonderful friendships developed from there. You know, we've known each other for so long now, and we've done so many books together, and it's just been a wonderful relationship. Ryan knows what I like about in the way design goes, and you know, we've very rarely had any issues about, you know, putting things together. And so Ryan was with me when we finished Ned Kelly, and he's been with me pretty much ever since, except for some of my recent comics. And I owe a debt of gratitude for Ryan. He's done some wonderful job with a lot of my books. So these days he only works on weekends for me, and he only does it because he loves what we do. This is the one here that we did after Ned Kelly. Now this one here is it's just a massive tome, and I can't believe that I've done this. Now I look back at it. I mean, how many pages was it? I can't remember. It's got every strip that was in the newspapers, and I've forgotten how many pages it is. So I just sneak a look. 390, almost 400 pages of newspaper comic strips, and it's as thick as thick.
Wow.
And as far as Monty goes, I don't think I could do any better for Monty. And I know his son Justin was really proud of the book, and I was super chuffed too. Justin, his son, came up to our home up here, and he presented me with all the original artwork in order to use the artwork for the book. And I was wondering how to get it scanned, because the artwork's huge. It's I mean the book is half the size of the original artwork, and I was wondering how the hell can we get the scan, because I didn't want to put it on it was too big for a scanner, and I didn't want to put it on one of those rolling scanners in case the artwork was damaged. So anyway, surprisingly enough, I had a chat to the art department at the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital, and the girl that does the media stuff up there said, look, I'd love to photograph it for you. So every page was photographed, so she did a wonderful job. And, it's the people behind the scenes that help out, that make these things just a pleasure. I was able to get a photographer to do a photograph of some of Monty's original memorabilia. That holster is Ben Hall's original holster that he used. The gun isn't, but the holster's actually Ben Hall's holster. So the people that behind the scenes that were just so willing to assist in giving help to make projects has just been amazing. So there you go. That's that.
Have you found? Oh, we've got it, Nat. We've got another comment from Christopher Sequeira here. Copies of Nat's Airhawk and Ned Kelly were given to me to Steve Ditko, Spider-Man, before he died, and were very much liked. Steve wrote me in his letters. Ditko recalled seeing Airhawk in the day. So there you go. Yeah, thank you very much, Chris, for your comments. And by me to Steve D, I should say. So there you go. Oh, yeah. And here's another one. Nat and I made sure to tell Monty's son Justin. So nice.
Very good.
Yeah, Nat, I'd have to say, man, like when you're talking about, like you seem to me, like from talking to you this evening, you're very self-aware and spiritual leaning, and what seems to have happened in a couple of those circumstances that you're telling me is like it's almost synchronistic, universe, like pathways have opened up to you in terms of these are things that you've wanted to do, that's tied into your past, and wondering how you're going to scan those images, and someone you worked with, I'd love to photograph them, and then like suddenly it's there to be done. I'm not sure how I'm going to do all this, like the graphic design stuff, you know what I mean? Whatever will become. And then I met this other fella who like led, like you to have this, like long lasting friendship and stuff like that, mate. It seems to me that, things, your path has always been clear, man, like from when you're a young fella, like, passion and determination and grit, and persistence are admirable qualities, sir, and that's what I'm seeing in you tonight from how you're talking, like you had your ups, you had your maybe. You're appreciating things.
Maybe, Lee, but I think sometimes there's things that happen behind the scenes where where it's not always that smooth sailing. And I can talk about some things that don't come off. For example, I mean, back in the day, I was passionate about Felix the cat, and I felt that you know that it's a character that had questionable heritage. The Americans say they own it. Well, phooey.
Yep.
I think we did. I think Pat O'Sullivan was an Australian, and he created it. And so on that basis, this is back in the 1980s. I wrote to someone and asked them, well, who owns the rights to Felix the cat? And I received a letter back from King Features saying that the rights to Felix the cat were owned by King's Features, except for Australasia. So Australia or New Zealand could publish a Felix the cat comic. And so to that aim, I had a conversation with Ian Eddy and asked him if he would be willing to do some illustrations for me, and he did some for me. Here's some here now. And I also got an email, not an email, a letter, because back in the day it was letters. And I received a letter from a new budding artist who said, well, look, I could write a script about Felix the cat, and I've got this script still here, and it's about 20 pages long, and I don't think I've got it here, but anyway, I received this email from this budding artist who said, I'd love to draw it for you if you'd allow me to do so. Anyway, it was Dylan Naylor, and when I saw Dylan's work, I thought Dylan's work, there's a dynamic aspect to his cartoons and his comics that he would be an ideal cartoonist for Felix the cat. The only problem there, though, was trying to locate the copyright holder, which would have been the next of kin of Pat O'Sullivan. And anyway, it took me years and years before I was able to locate the copyright holder. So unfortunately, I had a conversation with a solicitor in Melbourne, David the Fox, who drew Fox Comics or published Fox Comics back in the day. He's now works for entertainment as a lawyer. And he said, that if you wanted to try and challenge it, it's not likely you'd succeed. That it's unlikely that you'd be able to publish a comic there without the Americans jumping down your throat. So Felix the Cat's sort of something that's sort of, gone by the wayside, if you know what I mean. So there are projects that I sort of wish could happen, but they just don't for whatever reason, So it's not always smooth sailing, but nonetheless, I'm not really going to complain. Another instance really is I was doing a presentation of Air Hawk at the what's now the Australian Cartoonists Association, talking about my Air Hawk book. And I wanted some background information about John Dixon's early work. So I had a conversation with Graham Cliff. And I know Graham is a passionate Australian comics historian. And he told me, that I'm going to write a book about Australian comics just to try and supplement what John Ryan wrote in panel by panel. And, would it be okay if, would that be okay? What do you think about it? I said, that's a great idea. Go for it. And I said, have you got any material about Air Hawk? So he gave me some material about John Dixon and Air Hawk, which I utilised. And then over the years, I asked him, occasionally, how are you going with that book on Australian history, Graham? Oh, it's coming along, he used to tell me. It's coming along. And I used to ask him, probably every couple of years, what's happening with it? And, the same answer, it's coming along. And in the end, I thought, well, it's coming along. And so I'm coming on too. I'm getting a bit older and I'm not going to hold my breath worrying about it. So I just didn't think any more about it. And then it was just a few years back, Graham comes up to me. Hey, listen, I'm ready to publish this book about Australian comics. And he blew me away. I said, oh, well, that's good. I didn't expect it, So he came to me with his manuscript, and it did blow me away. Graham spent so much time researching it about how many comics so many people had drawn, where they were born, where they died. He went to grave sites. He went to family members. He went everywhere to research his book, and I felt it was too valuable a resource not to publish it. And
Yep.
and the end result is this fabulous book here. And
there
you go.
Sunbeams to sunset.
Yeah.
It's
I don't know
amazing.
if you can read the bottom there. The rise and fall of the Australian comic book from
1924 to 1965, does it say? 1965?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's right. From 1924 to 1965. Graham's belief is that the first Australian comic book was Sunbeams.
Yeah.
And he believes that the comic industry died in 1965 due to, for import restrictions being lifted and TV, just a range of factors really. And he doesn't believe that the industry's ever going to recover. But I don't know. I hold a different view than Graham in that regard, insofar as I think that there's still a lot of wonderful artists and cartoonists out there who want to tell stories, and that's the basis of comics. It's storytelling, and it's sharing those stories with everyone. And I think it's important to get those stories out there. Now, like I said to you before, that my wife wouldn't allow me to publish more without a distributor. Well, the worst thing could happen is that Dennis Jones and company went bust. And they were kind enough to tell us, that they were going to go bust, and that their warehouse was full of our books. And if you want to come and get them, come and get them. And being in Queensland and they being in Victoria made that a little bit difficult. But with some lovely people like Jim Bridges, I think Ian McCall, and Danny down in Melbourne, they all went to the place where Dennis Jones was and rescued as many copies of my books as they were able to, and I'm grateful for them too for doing so and rescuing them, I guess, from destruction. So anyway, I had the dilemma. What do I do now? I've told my wife that I'm going to only publish if we've got a distributor. Oh no!
What did you do, Nat?
What did I do? But sometimes things work out, and it's just sometimes amazing how things work out. I was at it's one of these things that seems really weird. I was at a work conference about suicide, and on the very first day of this conference about suicide, my sister passed away. I heard that my sister had passed, and I thought, oh, how can the day get any worse? Anyway, as the day was progressing, I got a phone call from Novella Distribution, and they said we'd love to distribute all of your books, and it was sort of bittersweet, I mean, I wasn't really taking much notice about this suicide conference because I was too preoccupied with my sister's passing, and at the same time I got this. So it was a bittersweet day, my sister passing, but by the same token, I was able to get a new book distributor. So that worked out really well, and so chugging along with more books, and let me go through a couple of them.
Please do.
Emile Mercier was a cartoonist. Now, Emile's got a wonderful story. If you don't know his story, I'll just briefly tell it to you. He was born in New Caledonia, so spoke only French, and his family was a baking family. They had a baking empire, and they made quite a bit of money about baking. And anyway, Emile's dad said to him, if you go to Australia, you're going to be disinherited. We're going to take you. You're not going to be in the will. We're going to cut your ties. You're gone. And nonetheless, he wanted to be a cartoonist. So he came to Australia. He did many occupations, and eventually became a very well-known cartoonist who did a lot of comics in the 1940s. And some of them were called Super Duper Man, a parody of Superman, and Trip Along Hoppity, parodying Hopalong Cassidy, and Mudrake the Magician for Mandrake. So he did a lot of these wonderful comics, and eventually he managed to get a job working in the newspapers, working as a cartoonist. And so I didn't know Emil, but I managed to have a wonderful association with his dad that I met one night at the cartoons award night, and had a conversation with Michael, who gave me permission to reprint some of his original cartoons in this book, and that was assisted by Philip Bentley, Phil Judd, Gary Clark, Ian. Look, just a lot of people. My daughters reviewed some of the cartoons, and we put it in a book, and it was all to benefit the the National Cartoon Gallery in Coffs Harbour. Yep. And if you ever get to Coffs Harbour, now the gallery was closed for a period earlier this year, but they've now reopened. They've also got a car museum inside the gallery. So if you like cars, that's great. If you like cartoons, it's great. If you like cartoons and cars, well, it's even better.
You're in heaven.
Yeah, that's right. So we had that. That was a Kickstarter, which was supported by a lot of wonderful people, and we managed to get that one published. And whilst I was in the process of publishing that, I got an email from Dylan Naylor that I hadn't heard from for years, and he said, Nat, I've got this book that I'd love to be published, and I've given it to an English publisher, and they've had it for 5 years, and they haven't done anything with it. Would you be interested in publishing it? We'll take the rights off them and we'll get it published. And I said, yeah, I'd love it to, Dylan. Dylan was one of the easiest people I've ever had the pleasure of working with, and we brought out this lovely book, and we were so honoured that it was awarded a bronze at the Comic Arts Awards of Australia, and I'm just so rapt. We had such a ball putting it together, Dylan, Ryan, and I, and it's one of the pride pieces that I've published. But we're not content with that. We put out another one just late last year, Rock and Roll Fairies.
Yeah.
And right at the moment, we're talking about. Well, Dylan's trying to. Well, I hope he is. Dylan, if you're listening, I want you to keep finishing colouring Dar and Dill. He's colouring Dar and Dill that used to appear in all of the show bags. The idea is to put those in a volume as well.
Yeah.
So there's some of the things. Now, one of the things about being in the Australian Cartoonists Association, I believe, is the friendships you make with people. Yeah. And I was at one of the meetings. I think we had it at Coffs Harbour, and in Coffs Harbour, I was just sitting down and I was looking at this guy that was sitting down intently watching the proceedings, and he was doing some drawing, and if you've never met a cartoonist, you've got this idea in your head about what a cartoonist should look like. Well, that's how it is for me anyway. I don't know. I mean, all cartoonists are different. They're ordinary people. But in my head, I've got an idea of what a cartoonist looks like. Anyway, this guy that was sitting in one of the seats, very intent, listening, drawing, to me, epitomised what a cartoonist should look like. And anyway, during the break, he came up to Gary Clark and I and said, hey, listen, do you want to have a look and see what I've done? I want you to see what my cartoons and see what you think of them. And I was just blown away. I just love this guy's work, and we've become firm friends. This Rob Feldman, if you've ever met Rob, you'll never forget him. And we put out this book that you can't get anymore because it's just out of print. But it's cartoons, comics, and cows in cars. And I thought we were going to do a short book, about 80 pages. Yeah, not a worry, Rob. I've got to write some more pages yet, Nat. I'm not quite ready. I wanted to get it out with Ned Kelly. And anyway, he kept on writing and writing. He's not ready yet, Nat. No, righto. Anyway, we eventually got it out there, and it's just fabulous. It's a bit like Monty Python on speed.
Yeah.
It's just so much fun. And lately, I asked Rob if he'd write another book, if he could do another book for me as a comic, not as a book this time, but as a comic, and we'll do it in colour. And could you make it about 28 pages? Yeah. No worries. I could do that. Yeah, no worries. Anyway.
Hey, it's going to come in about 56.
No, 84 pages. And it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. If you haven't seen it, there it is. There, Fridge Boy from Space. If you haven't read that, you've got to read it because that's just funny. It's a spoof of Star Wars. It's a spoof of old comic book characters. It's just wonderful. I just love it. And Rob, I love Rob. He's just a wonderful guy, and he is just what a cartoonist epitomized to me. Now, I do want to tell you about a story, and this is about Rob. I'm babbling on a bit, and I probably need some water, but I'm going to keep on going.
You keep going.
Rob was so happy about his book, and you know what? You know how I presented to him. I decided to fly down to Sydney and just knock on his door, and just say, "Hello, Rob. Here's your book." And so Rob was so over the moon about it that he decided to go to the book fair in Sydney, and he went to the book fair, and this fella came up to him and said, "Hey, do you know anything about cartoons? I've got this cartoon at home that I'd love you to have a look at. See it because it's been at my home for so long, and I want to know what I can do with it." So Rob said, "Oh, look, I'll have to talk to my mate Nat. He'll know more about it than me." So he gave me his email, and then I forgot it. I completely forgot because I was so busy doing Ned Kelly. Anyway, Rob wrote back to me and said, "Have you contacted this guy that's got this cartoon? He wants you to have a look at it." And I said, "Oh, I did forget." So I wrote to the guy, and he told me that he had a copy of, for God's sake, stop laughing, and I said, "What?" He said, "I've got this Stan Cross cartoon, and I'd like you to have a look at it." Now, back in the day, I don't know if you know this, back in the 1930s, Stan Cross did this really big cartoon that was it was just the rage of Smith's Weekly, which was a weekly magazine that came out and it was filled with features and a lot of cartoons. Anyway, this cartoon in particular was so well known that they printed copies of it, and it was distributed right around the world and right around Australia. And they made thousands of copies of this particular cartoon because it was so popular in the 1930s. It was about two guys on a building site. One was dangling down, and the guy on the bottom who's just grabbed the other guy's pants and pulled them down and said, "Just stop laughing. This is serious." But there were copies everywhere, and so when this guy told me that he had a copy of this cartoon, I thought, "Yeah, right, no worries. But can you tell me what size it is?" And when he told me the size, I had a conversation with Lindsay Foyle, who knows a lot about cartoons, and we came to the conclusion that that wasn't really a copy of the cartoon. So one afternoon after we'd finished at the Australian Cartoonists Association award night, Lindsay and myself, and Rob couldn't make it because he had to go to work, decided to drive to this fella's place just to have a look-see at this cartoon that he had. Anyway, it was the bloody original. It was fair dinkum the original. It was so huge. And it's known as Australia's funniest cartoon, and over the years people have been trying to find the original, and we were just blown away because we knew it was the original because we could see some of the whiteout in one of the anvils in the cartoon, and just amazing to find this cartoon, and it just blew us away. And the guy said, "I've just had it in my toilet because," we're going back to toilets, because he said, "I love to look at it every day." and there it was. He just had it there, and we learned the history about it. And anyway, later on, came back to Brisbane, and he asked me. His partner had developed some cancer, and they needed some money, and so they asked me if I'd have a negotiation with the National Library about acquiring the cartoon. And so we did a bit of haggling, and they agreed to purchase it, and they paid the guy $20,000 more than we expected, and so it was really nice for he and his partner. They were able to pay for their medical expenses, and so I wrote an article about it in the Ink Spot, and this was the first Ink Spot that I decided to edit, and I edited Ink Spot after it was just before Oi folded. I decided to join the ACA again and try to take a more active role in their organisation, and to that end, that was the first one I published. And the sad thing about it's sort of my favourite issue, really, the first one I did, because first of all, we're talking about the cartoon that Rob helped us discover, but also the fact I had to write an obituary about my friend John Dixon, because he'd just passed away just shortly before the issue came to press. And I had a long association with the ACA in editing their magazine. There, I did about 14 issues in total. I won't go through them all, but I suppose one of the things people will like to know and see, I suppose, is we did one on the Phantom, and and I joined. I was in the committee. And one of the things I thought that the ACA should do is that to get their message across is to try and get the magazine into all the libraries. And we managed to get a lot of the magazines in the New South Wales libraries, but unfortunately it cost them a fair bit of money. And the ACA, the ACA committee decided, that we're not going to spend that much money because it's too much money, and sadly, the libraries in New South Wales no longer have copies of them. But it was a good gig while it lasted, and in the end, I think I decided to call it quits. I think soon after my mum passed away. I think, I'd worked on Oi for a period of time, and then I worked with Ink Spots, and I managed to get the magazine out every quarter. And combined, I spent about 5 years getting a magazine out every quarter. And in the end, I thought, no, I need a bit of a break. So there you go. So that's some of the things. I'm also passionate about comic history, as you know, and so I work on the Ledger Awards, the living and the deceased ledger for the Comic Arts Award of Australia, and I enjoy that role. I've been doing that now for about 7 years, getting some guys together. We judge 2 awards. We've got some that are going to be judged in, or they've been judged already. We know who the winners are, and that'll be at a public function in Canberra I'm thinking about the 29th of November. And earlier on in the year, we had the ACA deciding to have their award on one weekend, and the Comic Arts Awards of Australia were going to have it on another weekend, and they were both in Canberra. And I thought, what are you doing this for? Why can't you get it together? So it was a matter of talking to Daniel, it was a matter of talking to Kathy and say, look, come on, guys. And the outcome has been really wonderful. We've got both awards on the same weekend, both in Canberra, and I think everyone will be happier for that. So sometimes it's nice to sort of, take an active role in the comic world and try and get a really good outcome for the people who love the comics, which is
absolutely
you and everybody that's listening. So,
mate, that's absolutely. I actually caught your post on Facebook, and that had the 2 separate dates, like 2 weekends apart in Canberra. And at the time you posted it, I was like, why wouldn't you just make a phone call to each other or send an email and
Yeah,
go, oh, you know what I mean? Like we could get everyone together in one place
yeah,
to,
yeah,
like,
yeah. Well,
do it
that's right.
all.
Well, yeah, well, that's right, Lee. And so when I put that there, I was still in the process in the background of trying to work them both to talk to each other. And I'm
Yeah.
really pleased that we got a sensible outcome there because, who wins? The comic fans. That's what it should be about. Um, anyway, not everything goes smooth sailing. I feel like I'm doing a big monologue here. Last year, late last year, no, it was earlier this year. I was a little bit concerned that I wasn't getting my checks from my distributor, what's happened, what's going on. And I tried to ring them and I didn't get any response and they weren't answering my email. So I decided to drive along because it's only their office is only about 45 minutes away from where I live. So I drove
Yeah.
down there and I found they'd closed up shop.
Oh,
So once again, I'm without distributor. And once again, I have so many books in my garage. And so there's a problem there because I did tell my dear wife that I'm not publishing books unless I get a distributor.
yes.
So,
Yes.
so where do I go? And I guess this is one of the things in life. Where do you go for comics? And I know Christopher was talking before, leaving his message about where do we go for the future of comics. And my feeling is, and I've had a discussion with Dylan about this and a few other people, is that my belief is that the world's a smaller place these days, and that we can't just be insular. I think that in order to publish comics, we have to do things for a more wider market than just Australia. And
Mm.
whilst I'm still passionate about the product here and the work that we put in here, I feel that the best way to get Australian comics seen by the wider community, I think the only way around that is by getting our comics seen by an international audience. And the only way to do that is to get the comics published, or rather distributed by Diamond or by Luna, because they're the guys that hold the monopoly. They're the guys that can get our comics out into the world. And so to that end, I sent a copy of Rob's book. I sent a copy of Dylan's 2 hardbacks. And I sent a copy of Dylan's comic. And I sent them a copy of my most recent Air Hawk. And I was hoping that they would say, yeah, look, they'd take them all and they'd distribute them so they go around the globe. And unfortunately, I don't know what Luna are going to say just yet, but unfortunately, Diamond have said no to everything except for Air Hawk. And so I feel the cycles come around again, that I'm in the process of publishing Air Hawk again for maybe a wider audience than my first cycle of Air Hawk comics. Don, my mate in Sydney's just finished producing or preparing the second issue for publication, and that's coming out shortly.
Yep.
So the idea will be to distribute them in the States. I'm not happy about the fact that they're not going to see other Australian work, so I've got another plan in place for that, and I'll share it publicly now. Is that my first issue of Air Hawk, that in this second incarnation, has 2 complete stories. My second issue has 3 complete stories, and my third issue is planned to have 3 complete stories. But after that, in issue 4 onwards, I'm going to put 2 complete stories, and as a backup, have an Australian comic there as well, so that the Americans and the British, everyone who gets comics from Diamond, can see that there's another Australian talent in the back of Air Hawk, but the same way as I did in the first time when I championed Trundle. And I'm hoping that in the back of the Air Hawk comics, we can champion other Australian talents. And I've got an idea of who they will be, but I won't reveal those yet because I'm still in discussions with those sort of people.
Yeah.
But where do you stop, Leigh? And where do you stop? I don't know. There's other things in the works. There's one book that I'm still working on that hasn't seen the light of day yet, but it's coming along. I'll talk about it now if you'd like. Do you want to keep going? Blah, blah, blah.
You can absolutely keep going, Mr. Carmichael, mate. This is for you, mate.
Okay. So a few years back, I got an email from someone in Melbourne, and they said, we found some original artwork. Would you be interested in identifying what it is? If you know. Anyway, I had a look at it. I thought, oh, that's Iron Outlaw. I knew that from John Ryan's book.
Yeah.
So they said, oh, we're just going to chuck it out because it's been here for ages. We just want to get rid of it if we can. I said, hey, how about I offer you some money for it and you send it up to me? So anyway, they were quite happy with the price I proposed, and they sent it up to me. And I thought it would be, probably about 2 or 3 pages. And anyway, it turned out to be 40 pages, original pages, out of the 52 pages that were, or episodes that were in the run. So I was just blown away, and I thought, well, what are we going to do with this? We just can't just sort of let it just sit here. Why don't we get the thing published? And so to that aim, I thought, I'll just have a conversation with a few people and see what they thought. Anyway, I remember Ian McCall. If you're there, Ian, I'll tell this story about you. Ian said, you're not likely to get these guys to talk because one was a writer, one was an artist, and they just don't see eye to eye. My understanding from what Ian told me is that one of the blokes was, when they first started drawing the Iron Outlaw strip, he had a girlfriend. And at the end of the strip, the girlfriend had gone to the other side. So... So there was a bit of animosity between the two blokes, my understanding.
Yeah.
Ian said, you'll never get them talking because they're not talking. They don't like each other and they won't get on. Anyway, me being me, I suppose, let's try this and just see where we go. Anyway, it took a bit of convincing, but anyway, Greg and Graham, or Fish as he likes to be called now, agreed to it. And with the help of Philip Bentley, we've been working on this project now for probably about another 4 years. But we're getting to the stage now where, with Ryan's help, we're getting to the stage where we might have a proof copy of the book very soon. So that's my hope anyway. My mate Ryan, that's done so much for me with all these books, has got a young little daughter. And so most of his time on the weekend is spent with his daughter, and that's quite understandable. So these days I'm looking at other people to help me with the production of comics, although Ryan still helps me. And the other thing that's coming up in the future, I suppose, and I'll talk about them now, I suppose, is going back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, Leigh, about English comics. There was a strip I remember from my childhood called The Cloak, and it was an English comic, and I really liked it. And I thought I'd just see if I can find out, if the creator's still alive and whether they'd be interested in putting their story in one volume. And I didn't think he'd be around, actually, because back in the 1960s, he must be a good age. Anyway, Mike Higgs is his name. And anyway, I found on the grapevine that, and the strip's called The Cloak. And along the grapevine, I heard that Alan Moore likes The Cloak. Anyway, so things have come to pass, shall we say. I'm name dropping here, I know. But anyway, Alan Moore says that if he can see us working on this project and he can see a PDF of what the book will look like, he's going to write an introduction for us. And how can I not work with Alan Moore? So
yeah, man,
there you go.
I think that's a project that's you could twist anyway. I think why wouldn't you?
yeah.
That's just, I don't know what to say about that. It's just a yep, I'm gonna have to do that, Yeah.
The only problem there, Leigh, is if I publish something like The Cloak, it'll be the first non-Australian product I've put out. So, but still, a chance to work with Alan or get Alan to write, an introduction. I can't say no. I've got to say yes.
Nat, Mate, I think listening to the body of work and your passion, your involvement, you work with the communities amongst Australian comics. So, like, cartoonists and, like daily strips, all those sorts of things. Your knowledge of history, you're trying to, you're keeping artwork from, like all, basically, I mean, you're stockpiling artwork that would otherwise not be treated as it should be. Um, and I mean, you're preserving it for like other people to look at and appreciate. I mean, because it is beautiful art. Like, I mean, like these artists put their time and their blood, sweat, and tears into these creations, and like, and man, I think if for everything that you've spoken about here and the fact you're still willing, what you've gone through, the ups and downs, the highs and lows and everything, and to maintain that passion, man. And like, I don't think anyone's going to hold it against you, man, for like doing the cloak to like work with, like to get, have an Alan Moore, you know what I mean? Like write an introduction, like that's pretty special, man. Like, so
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, for sure.
yeah,
To me, Leigh, the way I look at it is that artists work solo, and they work by themselves. They work quietly, and a lot of times they do it for the passion they have for the medium and the stories that they want to tell, and 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 I guess they don't seek acclaim like rock and roll stars or book authors or people or film producers, for example, or art or actors. They do it because they love to tell a story. And to me, they're the real heroes because they're telling stories that some of us can relate to. Some of us can't relate to them. It doesn't matter. But they're stories that are important for an Australian collective. And
yeah,
to me, they're the heroes. They're the people that we ought to revere because because a lot of their work represents who we are.
mm,
And even if they're talking about a superhero story, for example, there'll be little parts inside that story that'll reflect something about the day they wrote it or drew it.
yep,
And comics, to my mind, are a reflection of the era that we live in.
yep,
They tell a tale about how we are in 2024, or they tell a tale of how we thought the mores or the thoughts of 1964. For example, I've the very first Air Hawk that I've just published now. There's some sexist comments in there. There's some some things that we would say that aren't politically correct now. But does it matter? Not really, because it's a reflection of the time, and we're trying to preserve things like that. So if people in the future can look at it, I mean, because newspapers, they're disposable, they've gone, they've
yep,
disappeared. If we can't record some of these things, they're lost forever.
yep,
And we need to record the valiant work that these artists and these writers have done to put their blood, sweat, and tears into these stories because
yep,
they're our stories.
yep,
That's my belief. Yeah.
yeah. No, I think that's I think that's fair, man. I think that's really, really fair. Man, like, yeah, I'm just really I'm just enjoying sitting here, man, like listening to your stories and stuff, man. It's that's one thing I love about Tuesday Chinwags is getting to meet people
And
and
good, yeah, and good for you, Leigh, for doing that, because you're right. I mean, I think preserving the conversations you've got with these artists is important. It's probably just as important as what I'm doing in preserving their work. You're preserving their oral stories and the backgrounds that we may not be able to find in Graham's book or in John Ryan's panel by panel, because you're dealing with the current creators. You're dealing with the people that are in the here and now. And so in 20 years' time, 50 years' time, what you're doing now is a valuable resource. And people are going to look back and think, oh, look, that internet connection there was pretty shit. But does that matter? Because, it's the content of what you've got there
Yeah.
And it's the conversations you've had with these artists and these creators that are going to last longer. And more power to you, Leigh. Great work, mate. I think it's a good thing you're doing here.
Thank you, Nat. It's yeah, it's a look. As I've gone further along through it, Nat, it's very quickly becoming something that I've realised within myself through self-reflection of it's probably something. It's probably one of the most proud things that I've ever been a part of to do this.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
didn't start. It didn't start off with that intention, Nat, but as like me and Shane and myself, like over time of like just talk more about it, like thought about things, what like, and then we just think it, myself and he thinks, and then we talk, and then we realize like, man, like wow, okay, like, and for you to say something like that, Nat, man, very humbled and greatly appreciate it, man. Like, yeah, that's made me feel even prouder. So thank you very much for
Good on
that.
you. Good on you,
Yeah,
Leigh.
yeah, thank you, man. Nat, something that apart from our conversation and your commitment to Australian comics for so many years, as we've said, through ups and downs in your life story and that and your passion. And make sure you give your wife a hug tonight, mate, because she's a special lady, all right? Like,
She
make sure
is.
you do that. Yeah,
She
she is.
absolutely is. Yeah.
Yeah, you're lucky, man. Mate, something that I saw on the socials the other day that I know you're passionate about too, because we spoke briefly about it before the show, was something that I admired in you. As anyone that watches the show, or listens to it regularly, they would know that myself and Shane are pretty big advocates of mental health awareness, and looking after yourselves, looking after your brothers and your sisters, and being kind to people, and showing kindness, gentleness, and love and compassion where you can to your fellow man. And I think what you did the other day, I'm going to let you speak about it, as you wish, because I think it's a huge, um, from someone that suffered mental illnesses, from someone that knows people that, like, and still battles. I mean, I've had addictions and stuff, and, like from tonight's conversation, you're someone that, like has gone through things as well. But yeah, man, like I absolutely admire what you did the other day, and, telling, the world really what transpired where you used to work. If you would be so kind, Nat, as to let people know about they that side of you, if that would be okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So my work is as a clinical nurse at the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital. I'm still working there. I'm presently on long service leave, and I've got annual leave, and that'll probably see me out to my retirement because as you can see, I'm getting old. I'm 67 in December. So I've been working in that department, the Psychiatric Emergency Centre, now for 13 years. And in that time, mental health services have been increasingly needed by our community, and my concern, I suppose, is that the capacity to manage some of the people some of the people that require admissions has been greatly diminished by the lack of available beds. And I guess my concern's been something that's growing over the last 4 or so years, and to the point where I'm willing to speak up about the fact that we need something to be done, and it needs to be addressed. And the reason why I feel that I and my colleagues, if they're willing, need to speak up is because mental health patients don't have a voice. Mental health patients are marginalised in our society. They are stigmatised in our society still. And they're placed underneath the Mental Health Act, and they don't have a voice to say what they need and what's needed for them. And because we don't have the available beds for them, I've been increasingly concerned about the non-action of both governments and administrators in the place where I work. And it came to a head a little while ago. I was the acting nurse unit manager, and I came to work on a Monday morning, and I was told that there were no beds for the patients, and that some of them had to sleep on the floors and on the couches. And to me, that was just horrific. It's just something that shouldn't happen. And because they're mental health patients, why should they have to put up with that? It's a PG show. Why should they have to put up with that? Full stop. So I was outraged. It should not happen. And then it would have been probably about 4 or 5 weeks later, when I was back in my substantial role as a clinical nurse, and I was directed by the clinical director to accept. In my department, there's 4 beds, and there's an extra bed for emergency. So we've got 5 beds, and I was directed by my clinical director to accept more than 5 patients into my unit overnight, which means someone would have to sleep on the floor or on one of the couches, and I refused. I said I wouldn't do it. I was directed by my after-hours nurse manager to follow the direction, and I refused to do so. And I had a standing up. I rang the clinical director. He was at home, but I rang him up, and I just told him that I refused to follow his direction, and he could do what he wants, because it just wasn't right. And then following that, I suppose I felt that I had no recourse except to talk to the media. And there's a very nice journalist that I've come to know even better, I suppose, since I spoke to her for the ABC. And we over a period of about 2 or 3 weeks, we had some conversations. She was given copies of my emails that I sent to management, which by the way were never answered from management. And we decided to do a story about the situation because it just wasn't right. So I did have to consider whether or not I should speak publicly or whether I should speak anonymously. I did have to juggle up the pros and cons. I mean, I have signed an agreement, I believe, that I don't speak to the media. I think I signed that, a code of conduct. I think that's why they call it, a code of conduct, when I joined Queensland Health, not to speak to the media or unless it's been authorised. But I chose to speak in defiance of those code of conducts and those directives because of the fact that mental health patients have no voice, and they need a voice, and they need someone to speak up. But nothing's really changed, and I guess that's a disappointing aspect. The minister has released a statement just a couple of weeks ago where she's acknowledged the people who have stood up to point out the failings of the system, and she has promised $8 million into our unit at the Royal. There's also, and I don't mean to be cynical, but there is an election in October. So I don't know whether that's... Look, I don't think it is window dressing. I was going to say that it could be window dressing, but after I did speak to the ABC, the minister did invite my wife and I into her office, and we had a conversation with her. And I found her very approachable. I did think she was listening, and subsequent to the meeting in her office, I invited her down to our department, where she came down one day, and she spent a good hour, maybe more, with our staff, and we talked about our issues and why we felt we were not being listened to. And so subsequently, just a little while ago, the $8 million has been promised. I was a little bit dismayed by the fact that the state opposition leader has decided to say very little. And so I sent him a copy of my thoughts to him, to the Courier Mail, in relation to my recent conversation with the ABC journalist. And the opposition leader's spokesperson did ring me just a few days ago and essentially told me that if the money's in the budget, they will honour it. They have said that they will maintain a mental health levy that's placed on Queenslanders if in order for mental health. But I felt that I did feel that he wasn't saying his spokesperson wasn't saying enough for me. He wasn't really giving me any policy direction about what he thought was important, and he wasn't really telling me how he would address the issues, which to me are the lack of beds. The Courier Mail rang me today, and they had a few questions for me. They are running a story tomorrow morning. I don't know. The ABC at least were able to give me a transcript or a rough of what they were going to publish, and they gave me the latitude of correcting things that weren't right, or of being able to correct things that weren't quite right before they published. The Courier Mail hasn't done that. They've decided to run with a story, the contents of which I don't know what it'll entail or what it'll say. So I'm a little bit in the dark about what they're going to publish. I know that I have given them a statement. It was a statement I gave to the health minister, and it was the same statement I gave to the opposition leader. The fact that they're saying something is good. I do think it ought to be, that pressure ought to be placed on government, and I think pressure ought to be placed on the opposition, given that there's an election coming, because I think that the mental health patients in our state deserve no less. They need to have a voice to say something about the way the situation is. I mean, I'm probably getting on my high horse here, Leigh, but in our department we have 5 beds, as I say. Oftentimes we have patients who come to our department who require admission. They need to be admitted somewhere for their mental health treatment, and they require high dependency nursing. And by that, I mean they need intense nursing. Our department is simply an assessment area. It's not designed as a ward, and it's not designed as a treatment area, and it's not designed to house people. It's really a stopgap before the assessment's made and a decision about where they go is made. We have patients in our area that require high dependency nursing that have been there up to 8 days. And I can think of a first Australian lady that was there 8 days. She was 8 days waiting for treatment to start before a bed was found for her. And to me, that is not good enough. That is just far below standard of what I would expect were I to be that patient or that patient's loved one or anything. The fact that she was a First Nations lady made it even more worse for me personally. I found that too hard to cope with. But you know, that's the state of play. The number of beds for mental health patients have not increased over the last 20 years. We're seeing an increase in methamphetamine use. We're seeing an increase in alcohol use. We're seeing an increase in medicinal cannabis use, and all of these things add to psychosis or people requiring mental health treatment. Sometimes it's just temporary. Sometimes it'll last just for 24 hours, but sometimes it's more long-lasting that needs more intense care. And if these people don't get it, where are they going to get it? We've had patients who have left our department simply because they don't want to wait for that treatment to commence, and they've harmed themselves, and it's not good enough. Yeah, off my high horse. I'm passionate about my work too, Lee. I guess I'm passionate about life, really. But you know, people that have no voice need a voice. And there's so many things in society that people need voices. We've got people who suffer domestic violence. I mean, they need a voice, and it's getting amplified in the media. That's great. There's a lot of things that First Nations people need, and that gets a reasonable amount of voice, especially prior to the referendum, I guess. Mental health people don't seem to have had it. The homeless people, and I suppose I can speak from that experience in my past. I suppose, knowing when I was homeless, even though it may have been by choice, knowing the fact that I had drugs in my system, knowing that there's people that are probably worse than I was back in the day who need the help and can't get it. I think I was able to manage to become sober myself, without requiring interventions. But I know that there's other people that can't. There are people that need help, and at the moment, I don't think they're getting that help that they need. And I think that's very sad, because it's an indictment in our society. We're spending how many billions on some. Sorry, PG. We're spending so many billions of dollars on some submarines. There are people homeless. There are people that require mental health assistance. There are need for more teachers, more nurses, more doctors. For God's sake, we don't have an overnight psychiatric registrar in our department. I mean, from 10:30 at night until 9 o'clock in the morning, you can't get a psychiatric registrar. You have to wait until the following morning. It's just not good enough. We're treating mental health patients like third world citizens. It should stop. It's got to stop. People need help. Sorry.
No, mate. That's after seeing your story and stuff the other day, and as I said, seeing how passionate you are about comic books, and seeing your passion in that ABC story and on your socials and things, and sharing similar passions, man. I admire the fact that you took a stand, mate. Because there's a lot of people would know what's going on and they chose not to speak about it, but you've put yourself forward to put information that needs to be heard for the sake of minority groups, that do deserve and need to be cared for. Because, I think the general population, when they hear of mental illness, they just have these basic images. They don't realize how intricate each illness is, like the traumas, the post-traumatic stuff that triggers these things. Majority of people probably think it's all drug and alcohol related, but it's not. It's just, there's chemical imbalances, there's people escaping violence, there's a whole heap of stories behind it, mate. And I think that Nat is is as valuable part of your story as the story that you've told us for the first couple of hours of this, man, because I admire, your stand, man, and I hope more people take notice of it, and again, show some more compassion to their fellow brothers and sisters out there, because there's a lot of people doing it hard. The world's not getting easier. On this show, and Sis, one of the things about ComX is, I'm a firm believer in creativity can help, find within calm, bring a little bit of peace to you, because it certainly helped me in my times, and when I was going through my issues, mate, which I still do. I'm not out of the woods yet, but hey, getting there, mate, getting there.
Good on you.
That's the thing that one day at a time, they say. So
that's right. Yeah, there's a saying in the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And it goes, I wish I had the ability to change the things I can, the inability to see the things that I can't, and the incapacity to accept the things I can't, or something like that. I can't remember exactly now. I've got it all muddled up. Anyway, there's a really nice, I'll have to send it to you later. It's a really nice, anyway, I think I've got the incapacity to make changes, you know. Oh, no, to accept changes. Oh, I can't remember the cartoon. I'm sorry. I thought I had it in my head, but I haven't. But anyway.
I think that's perfectly lovely, Nat. Now, Nat, as we wind down our show, mate.
Yes, yeah.
I would like to ask you the one thing that I try and ask everyone is we know why you do it, but you know, if you were at a convention or you were at Comic Street or you know you were at the ACAs, the ACCAs, wherever you wish to be, and there was you, like older Nat, and little Nat came up to you and said, you know, like, how do I get to you? What would you say to them? What would your advice be to little Nat about comic books and stuff, mate?
Make more comics, because I'd tell. Look, there's a lot of things I'd tell little Nat. I would probably say, don't do drugs. It just you waste your time doing drugs. I would tell little Nat. Make more, because I think that the world is becoming increasingly a sad place, an anxious place, a place where people are more fearful, sometimes of each other and of others, and make more comics that can bring joy, make more comics that can bring hope, and make more comics that can tell tales that inspire, because they're the tales that I read now that inspire me. I you know, there's nothing I quite like than listening to some wonderful, inspiring music or reading a comic that makes you feel there's some hope or brings joy. Joy is what the world needs at the moment, as well as love. I think joy is important. That's what I think.
And
Sean, yes, that's it. Yes.
Sean Shea, the strength to change what I can, the inability to accept what I can't, and the incapacity to tell the difference.
That's me. I'm having that read at my funeral.
We got there thanks to the audience and thanks to Mr. Carmichael. So there you go. Nat, mate, once we finish up, just stay on the line because we'll have a little debrief after the show. But look, I'd like to, mate, I'd like to welcome you to the Chinwag family. And I'd like to, look, I'm very grateful, man, for tonight and your insights and your lessons and just from someone that's only been in the, you know, doing comics for a little while, man, like to hear these stories from people like yourself and everyone else I've met's very inspiring, man, to me, and keeps me going and wanting to pursue to get better and better. Thank you for your work with mental health. Thank you for your work in comic books and telling us these lovely stories. And yeah, man, pleasure and thank you. To everyone out there that's watched the show, thank you very much for always supporting Chinwag. Thank you very much for supporting ComX. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channels because, you know, like it helps the algorithms and it gets out to more people and we can share stories like Nat's and we can share the other shows that are on the ComX network. The show is sponsored by the ComX shop. There's over 100 Australian creators and comics on that shop. $9 flat rate, so buy one comic, buy 20 comics. It's you know, just go out there, buy some stuff, man, support, you know, like the industry, the community, show some support, spread your love and show some compassion for people. And you also know that at the end of the show there are phone numbers for Lifeline that will be coming in case anyone out there is struggling. those phone numbers have helped me in the past, and perhaps they may help you or somebody else out there. So if you know someone that needs a hand, like go and give them a hand. A smile can go a long way. And see you next week. In community is unity, and Chinwag is and always will be made with love. Thank you. See you later, Mr.
Thanks,
Carmel.
Leigh.
No worries. Bye-bye.
This show is sponsored by the Comics Shop. Check out over to comics.shop to pick up a variety of Australian comics from multiple creators and publishers, all for one flat postage rate. We hope you enjoyed the show.